run for president?
President what?
Huh?
President.
President.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for sharing your Saturday with us. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk Simpson, roll call, please.
Trustee Vogel.
Here.
Trustee Brady.
Here.
Trustee Krueger.
Present.
Trustee Lang.
Here.
Trustee Papantos. Present. Trustee Vito.
Here.
President Parker.
Here. Citizens' concerns and comments?
There are none.
Just checking my phone, make sure it gets turned, making sure it's turned off. Mr. Svandelis, this is
Get right into it.
your show.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you everyone for coming. This is the budget hearing for the fiscal year 2019 budget process. I will go through the agenda in just a moment, but want to first start by saying thank you, credit where credit is due. Thank you to the staff that is in the room and their staff that is not for preparing the third consecutive balanced budget. Thank you to the board for their leadership in giving us the opportunity to have the ability to do our jobs and serve our citizens and our business community. As I said, this is the third consecutive balanced budget that you will be discussing today. And budgeting in a bubble for a single year can be easy enough. The challenge for staff and for the board is the long game. We really need to be looking 5 years out, 10 years out. That tells you whether or not you're fiscally responsible, whether or not you're going to be able to provide service appropriately for the citizens and the businesses for years to come. And that really is the theme for today, is of course looking at the year ahead of us, but also planning for the long game. Director Monchain does an excellent job of trying to predict the future. And I think history tells us he's done a very good job of that. But there are many factors that go into those predictions that are uncontrollable. And sometimes those are good, sometimes those are bad. We budget fairly close to actual, as close as we can get to the actual required needs of staff for the community. And what that does then, when there are outside forces, usually the state, as we have seen in the past, they have levied a number of unfunded mandates against us that have a negative impact, and there's no way we could predict those. This year we have a surplus far in excess of what we had planned for last year when we were preparing for the 2018 budget. So it's good news this year. But what is the definition of surplus, particularly this year? The items, and it's all in the budget memo, which is the opening pages of the document, which hopefully everyone has read, details why we have a surplus this year. And I think what you will notice is that most of those things are not controlled by any efforts of staff or the board. The state made a number of changes this year that positively affected us. They loosened their grip a little bit on sales tax collections, on their charge for handling the money and distributing the money. They made changes to the 911 revenue. Those things we can't control. This year they played in our favor. What didn't play in our favor is Sam's Club closed. That was a major hit for us on the revenue side. So I just want to make sure that as we move forward and we talk about surplus, everyone understands what it means and how fragile that is, even though it's good news, and it is good news. I think what we should be very proud of is the fact that, again, you are being presented with a balanced budget prior to any discussion about a levy increase. The levy increase goes back to what I said earlier about the long game. This is about long-term sustainability of our community. And we will get into all of that when Director Monchain begins his presentation. One of the things that I want to point out that I don't think is specifically in a slide today is how did we get to balance? Looking back for the last 9 years, it's been a difficult time for the country. And you've heard me say this in years past, but I think it bears repeating. Over the last 9 years in aggregate, we have added a number of positions, but after you balance out what we have added in, we are down 44 positions. And the value of those 44 positions is $4 million annually. So had we not taken the initiative to look at the way we fund, and by that I mean the personnel doing the job, had we not taken those steps early on, we would be looking at an additional requirement for $4 million every year just to pay for those salaries. That equates to about a 27% tax levy increase. And that is just personnel. That is separate and apart from the operating budget that has been reduced and is essentially flatlined for the last 9 years, which is saying something considering inflation. I think that is a highlight that bears repeating and needs to be said every year because that is the definition of responsible budgeting. We will be talking today, what's the agenda? So the agenda today, we're going to work backwards if the board agrees. Typically, we have Director Monchain begin the day with his presentation. And again, to the theme of long-term planning, I thought maybe we could start this year by answering any of the board's questions about the operating budget. That way we don't take our head out of the game when it comes to the bigger picture. The operating budget is less than half of the total budget. Of that operating budget, nearly 80% is personnel. It is essentially flat from last year. There are no additions, we will talk about pink sheets and expanded level services, but as far as the operating budget goes, there are no additional services, no additional contracts, no anything. It is what you saw last year. For the public's benefit, the operating budget goes through an extensive review process, beginning, of course, internally with each department and their department head before it comes to me. We meet with the leadership team in each department, the assistant manager, the finance team, and go line by line through every single, I was going to say every single budget, every single line item within every single account. And review it, make edits, it goes back to the department, changes are made, a draft budget is then sent to the board. We have for the last several years had a liaison program, which means that each elected official is assigned to a specific department. Meetings are then had individually with the department and an elected official, and then they go line by line or to whatever degree that trustee would like to dive into the operating budget of that department. The purpose is that instead of just a general conversation like we're going to have today, the public and the rest of the board can be assured that the process has gone through where everything has been looked at. And that brings us to today. The purpose of today really is the bigger picture. So before we introduce Michael, I thought it would be a good idea to simply ask the board, this is the opportunity for any questions regarding the general fund budget. Again, at the end of the day, we will talk about what we call pink sheets. Pink sheets are expanded level services. If anyone in any department has a request for additional personnel, additional significant purchases, they are put on a separate sheet. They come to me, I either sign them or I don't. If I sign them, they go on white paper and are included in the budget. If I don't sign them, they are on pink paper. Just because I signed it and because it is an expanded level of service doesn't mean anything. It is simply my recommendation to the board. You have to give your blessing as to whether to add it or not add it. We will go through each of those, whether I signed them or whether I didn't, at the end of the day. So please know that we will be coming back to that. After Michael's presentation, we will also then be focusing on the larger revenue questions. There are a couple of opportunities beyond the tax levy that we would like to introduce to the board and we'll be introducing to the board towards the end of our meeting. regarding additional revenue opportunities. So with that, President Horker, if it's okay, I'd just like to ask the board if there's any department, any line item, any question that you would like answered. Everyone is prepared to hopefully catch whatever you throw at them.
Fine. Crickets. No questions?
Well,
Trustee Brady has.
Easy.
I was just going through this in general, and in the expenditures for your comparison by fund, it seems like this 2019, they got some odd figures compared to what we did the past year or two. And, if you go to page 41, miscellaneous equipment and supplies, last year, we budgeted 33,000 and we spent 200,000. This year we want 1,335,000.
What, may I ask what line, what account number are you in?
Page 41,
5313.
5313.
Well, Luca is not here, but the reason is this is all of our computer purchases, including several of the items that, Michael, this includes capital, correct?
What's deceiving about that particular report that you're referring to is that it encapsulates all of our funds. It's not just the general fund. So yes, it includes, capital projects, capital equipment, those kind of things. And so we can look in, if you give me a minute or two, we can tell you why that went up as much as it did.
But
Go ahead.
just in general, when we collect sewer and water money from the residents, where do you put them funds?
The water and sewer money goes into the water and sewer fund, which is a separate fund, has nothing to do with property taxes or anything like that. The fees that people pay for water are used to maintain the water and sewer system and pay the salaries and benefits of
How do you
those
get the
employees.
money then for the stormwater, project per our, latest thing?
Yes, stormwater is also a separate fund of the village. And so that money, which is $2.50 per ERU for a residential home, goes into the stormwater fund and is only used to pay for stormwater projects.
But does that appear on the bill as such?
All of the expenditures that are budgeted, regardless of fund, would roll up into that budget report that you're looking at.
Like, going to page 42, same thing on this four-year comparison. Sanitary sewer improvements is jumping up to 1,900,000. Water improvements, budgeted last year, 487,000, is now $2,595,000. Storm sewer improvements, it jumped up from 774,000 to $3,132,000. Sidewalk improvements, everything seems to have huge building improvements.
Right, and I can tell you the reason for that is because of capital improvement projects, which fluctuate greatly from year to year. We may have minimal projects budgeted in one year and then substantial projects in another. So you are going to see large fluctuations from one year to the next. That's not indicative of any, problem with the budget. It's just the nature of the 5-year capital improvement program.
Okay, I see it.
And getting back to your other question that you asked originally, Brian looked it up, and that's all 911 related equipment that was budgeted to be purchased next year that, wasn't, of course, purchased last year, so that's why it went up so much.
But doesn't that come under the 911 equipment, doesn't that come under SURF?
We buy some of it out of the 911 fund and some of it out of the SURF fund, yeah. But it's still, even if it comes out of SURF, it still rolls up into the same budget account.
Okay. Hang on 1 minute, I got one.
And then regarding your question about the stormwater fund, Brian looked that up too. And one of the reasons that's up so much is because we budgeted for the purchase of stormwater credits. As you'll recall, we have this intangible asset, which is stormwater credits, that we have in effect been selling to developers as they build their projects in Wheeling. What happens is that we budget the money in the TIF district to purchase the credits from the stormwater fund, and so that's part of that cost as well.
I'm going to jump around here a little bit. I only had a couple of points to questions on. Under capital improvements, page 170, boardroom equipment and supplies. It goes from budgeted last year 208,000. Now we're 50,000.
That's a one-time purchase. Our AV equipment is now 10 years old and starting to break down, as it did a couple weeks ago when we nearly couldn't broadcast. So that's a one-time purchase, well, once every 10 years or so, for AV equipment.
I hope it'll make it easier to watch on television, because the system sucks that we got now.
It's not us. That's the cable company. That's the cable company.
Our lips are going to be moving faster than our voices?
That is the cable company's bandwidth allocation for local government channels.
Okay.
We have the technology to broadcast in HD if the cable companies
And there's
provided us the opportunity.
One other question on water system projects on 191. Lead service line replacement, $135,000. What lead pipes do we have that's the village's responsibility?
We still, and Director Janik can give you more detail, we still have some, well, do you want to, because I was going to introduce something that's going to be coming to the board.
That expenditure is not, we're not positive, that's in the CIP. We're not positive we're going to be spending that money, but it's proposed expenditure of money. There are still some lead pipes in the village, there's not very many. But as you know, this is a really the topic of a conversation among health professionals as well as many municipalities about replacing their lead lines. We put that in the CIP in case the board would like to expend that money on replacing lead lines in the community.
This is a discussion and a decision the board is going to have to make. Mark has already prepared a presentation that I've reviewed. This is absolutely a policy call that you will get to make as to whether or not the board wants to engage in a project like this.
Would that mean a residential too? Because,
Not interior, we're talking about service lines.
okay, because just about all of Old Town is all lead. All the services to the houses.
We've identified, I believe the number is 160, but think there's about 200. Is that accurate?
We actually know of approximately 110, but we think that we actually know of approximately 110, but we think that there's probably 150 to 200 out there, but not all of Old Town at all. We know that because when we change the meters out, we do check to see if there's lead lines. Now we can't be positive every single time, because sometimes lead in the inside has been replaced with copper just to the outside of the foundation. So this project would be both to search out where the lead lines are, and then find out what the cost would be, and then the board would decide whether or not to do that project.
Okay. And then one last thing. I was going to ask some questions of our police department, but Jamie seems to have brought the posse along, so I think I'll just drop them.
Any other questions we can answer? Trustee Papantos?
When I went through the budget and looked at the revenues, I was surprised to see that there's not more of a expected drop on the cable franchise fees. It seems to me more and more people are wandering away from the traditional cable TV and going more into the Netflix and just, antenna and services as they need, per se.
Right.
Do we think that we're going to take a hit on that?
Yes, and normally when I budgeted the revenue for that, I've increased it a little bit every year. This year, I don't recall, but I think it's either flat or maybe a little bit down. Yeah, I think that's going to continue to be a factor, as it has been with telecommunications tax too, which has been dropping every year because people are getting rid of their landlines and that revenue source drops. So I don't think at this point that it'll be large decreases from year to year, but it's probably not going to grow. I think that's fair to say.
And speaking of telecommunications, I still can't wrap my head around the fact that, yes, people are dropping landlines, but we're now getting 3 cell phone lines per household instead of 1 landline, or what every household member seems to have their own cell phone line, so I would expect it to go up. Is there some way we can work with the powers that be that we get the right taxing rate on these individual lines, more of a flat fee than?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I think it's something that we could certainly pursue with the Northwest Municipal Conference legislatively, because the way that the tax works right now, it doesn't apply to anything that happens over the internet. So, like I can tell you with my 2 teenagers, they don't make a lot of phone calls. They do Snapchat and they do texting and all that kind of stuff. And that's not taxed. So I think that's the reason why, even though there's more cell phones than there probably were landlines at one point in time, the base that the tax is being applied to is much lower than it used to be. And that's why that revenue source keeps dropping. But to your point, I think, if there's a way to do a flat fee per line like we do with the 911 fee, or like the state does, I should say, that might be a better approach. Whether or not that's constitutional, I don't know. I would have to leave that up to the attorneys, but something to look into.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, Director Monchain, it is your show. President Horker, whenever you feel appropriate, we could take a break. I wouldn't suggest now, but whenever anyone thinks so, please just let us know.
That was perfect.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Great, we're done.
All right.
Break.
Well, thank you and good morning to everyone. And I just wanted to echo what our village manager said and thank the village board for being here and really for participating in this process. I know it takes a lot of your time, and I think it's commendable that you're willing to give up a Saturday morning. There's not a lot of people these days that are willing to run for public office and do this, so we all appreciate your participation in this process. And I'd also like to thank the village manager and our department heads and the employees of each department who participate in this process and prepare their budget requests and really do an excellent job. And the reason we know they do an excellent job is because when we look at the end of the year and we compare our budgeted expenditures to our actuals, we're always really close. So I just wanted to indicate that I appreciate the work that they do. And also I wanted to thank the finance department staff, some of whom are here today, Brian Smith, Mike Morrow, and Angela Peters, who really do a lot of the detailed work to put the budget together. Roughly 75 to 80% of the budget is salaries and benefits, and they put those numbers together along with a lot of other budget items, and they do a great job, so thank you for that. And this year, we are in a much better place, and I am personally feeling much more optimistic about where we're at than I have been in prior years. And I know that in prior years, I've spent a lot of time talking about things that are not going as well as we would like in terms of revenue and expenditures and so forth. But as our manager indicated, we do have a surplus budget this year, and that continues a string of several surplus budgets. Or balanced budgets rather, I should say. So we're doing well. And as a result, I thought I would spend less time today talking about the budget itself. I do have slides to go through that relate to the budget, but I want to go through them relatively quickly. If you have any questions, as always, please stop me and interrupt me, and we'll try to address them at the time. But what I really wanted to do is focus on what I am referring to as some key discussion topic areas that I think are big picture items that are important for the board to consider as we move forward. And so there'll be less focus on the operating budget and more on those types of items. And this year, to try to make things a little bit more interesting and maybe a little bit more fun, I thought that we as a group, meaning the board and everybody who's in attendance here and those who are at home and would like to play along, could play a game called Kahoot. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but you are, okay. Yep. So we have at least one person who's familiar with Kahoot, and it's a trivia game, and we've based it mostly on the Village of Wheeling this year. And so the way it works is I need everybody who has a smartphone or an iPad to go to kahoot.it on the internet. And when you get there, there will be a PIN number. If I can find that. Okay, and there it is. So you enter that PIN number where it tells you to do so. Give everybody a chance to do that. And then it's going to ask you to put in a nickname, and you can use your actual name or you can make up a name if you don't want to be embarrassed by your final score. You can make up a nickname. If you're feeling really confident, you can put in your own name. And so I'll give you a chance to do that.
The signal's too slow. Luca? We'll play Luca. That's it, he's not allowed to play.
And the system has if you try to put in a word that's not appropriate, it will change that to an appropriate word, just so you know.
Like Siri spelling.
It's kind of a fun game just to see if you know who people
Yeah.
put in for nicknames.
Well, I know who Fisherman is.
Okay, so we have 17 players, 18 players. Trustee Ray.
I spelled that wrong.
That's okay.
It works. You're very trusty.
And we'll come back to this in a minute. But just so you know what the rules are, so there are 11 questions. The first two questions are practice questions that don't count for any points, just so everybody can get the hang of it. There are pictures that are associated with each question, but the pictures do not necessarily indicate what the correct answer is, so don't let that fool you. You will have 30 seconds to answer the question, and the faster you answer, the more points you get. So if you get the correct answer, but you wait 30 seconds to enter it, you won't get as many points as other people. You have to choose the right color that appears on your phone. And there will be prizes for the top 3 finishers, and they are fabulous prizes, I can assure you. And just as a disclaimer, there were no tax dollars used to purchase these prizes, so don't worry about that. And if we're ready, we can try the practice questions. Let's see if I can get there. Okay, so we have 20. It looks like some people are still joining. Are we all ready to go? Okay, here we go. Last chance, and then we're going to start. Okay, so here's the first practice question. And what you'll see is that there are colors on your iPhone or whatever phone you're using that correspond with those answers, and you have to just tap the correct color. So the question, of course, is who was the second president of the United States?
Oh, tricky.
Tricky. I
it's
looked
very
at the picture.
Can you go
Fix it
back?
now?
No, once you enter your answer, you're kind of stuck with it, so.
Not if I shut my phone down.
Okay,
I did the color.
so you can see that we had 11 people who got the question right, and what, 8, 10, 12 who got it wrong? Okay. And so far, since this wasn't worth any points, this would, everybody's in first place at this point. But you can see that these are the leading people at this point. So we'll try one more practice question. And the question is, how many games did the White Sox win this year? And I know you're all big White Sox fans, so you know the answer to this.
Oh, let's go.
That is not nice. Yes, right. Okay. The answer was 62 games, which 7 of you knew, which is great. And I'd just like to point out that while 62 wins is not particularly great, 2 of those wins did come against the Chicago Cubs. And if I remember correctly, the Cubs finished in a tie with the Brewers. Had they not lost those 2 games to the White Sox, well, they might be World Series champions now, so. It's a lot of losses. Thank you for pointing that out, Chief.
Trying to stay on the positive, Chief.
Okay. All right, so moving back to the presentation. So throughout the presentation, there'll be more questions that come up.
And just as a point of note, this is meant for a little levity to a very serious discussion today. I feel like the responsible parent that just needs to say, the rest of the questions are all about Wheeling. This was an excellent idea, I think, that Director Monshane came up with, just to keep everyone engaged as we work through some very serious discussions. So thank you for your participation and understanding.
Oh, Dad, get real.
Well, saying.
Keeping us from napping.
Okay. So here are the topics that I had planned to cover today. We're going to talk about the economy. What is the budget for those people who may be watching at home and are not familiar with how a municipal budget works? I'm going to go over that briefly. I'm going to tell you where it looks like we're going to end for 2018. We'll talk about revenue and expenditure trends, the property tax levy, next year's budget. We'll talk about our accomplishments over the last year. And then I have these key topics that I'd like to talk to the board about regarding pension funding in TIF districts, and then a final piece on a discussion of property tax rates. So the economy is good, and that is all I have to say about that. In years past, I have spent a lot of time trying to demonstrate to you how the economy is, and this year I think everybody knows the economy is better than it's been in many years, and so I don't think I have to spend a lot of time on that. The next topic is, what is the budget? And it's really not as confusing as a lot of people might think. In essence, our total budget for 2019 is a little over $95 million, but that includes the budgets for all of the individual funds, and we talked a little bit about that earlier when Trustee Brady had a couple questions about that. As you will see, each of these funds is in essence like a separate bank account, although they are not separate bank accounts because that would cause my staff to want to quit. The money is generally commingled, but we treat them as separate accounts because each fund is has a separate revenue source and a separate function. So I just want to highlight a couple of them here. You can see that our TIF funds have $19.6 million budgeted for next year. That includes surplus declarations and debt service expenses and so forth. We have money budgeted in our police and fire pension funds, which are trust funds set up to pay pension benefits. You can see how that works. We have debt service funds. All of these funds have a specific function. And then the bottom line is the fund that we spend the most time talking about. That's the general fund. That's $38.5 million next year, they're almost 38.6. And that really represents what most people think of as the budget. It's all of the police officers and firefighters and public works employees and admin salaries and benefits and all of the operating costs that we rely on to provide core services to the community every year.
Excuse me, Michael?
Yeah.
Do any salaries come out of these sub-funds?
Yes, we do budget salaries in the TIF funds for our business development coordinator because she spends a lot of her time doing TIF district-related work. We have salaries budgeted in our water and sewer fund for the employees who spend their time maintaining and improving that
It's
system.
associated with that
Right.
fund.
So yes, there are other funds. And the 911 fund also contains the salaries, most of the salaries and benefits of our dispatchers. So there are examples of that throughout the budget.
Could you explain, back up, sorry,
Oh, okay.
on the TIF fund? Oh, you went to-
Whoops, I'm going the wrong way.
Oh, you don't have to. I don't have to see it.
There
Could
it
you
is.
just explain surplus distributions and what was the other thing you mentioned on the TIF account? Debt service.
Debt service, right. So as the board is aware, for the last several years, really going back to 2005, the village has declared surpluses in some of our TIF districts. We have 5 TIF funds. We have generally declared surpluses in the Crossroads TIF and the South Milwaukee TIF districts. And those are pursuant to intergovernmental agreements that we have with the other taxing districts. So every year in the Crossroads TIF, we declare 72% of the property tax increment that's coming into the TIF district as surplus, and we distribute it back to the taxing districts. The Village of Wheeling gets its share, as do our pension funds. In the South Milwaukee TIF, we have a similar agreement where we distribute 45% of the increment that comes in every year. And those were agreements that we reached with primarily the school districts, but the other taxing districts as well. In addition, the TIF funds include debt service expenses for debt that we have sold, bonds that we have sold related to projects that we've done. So the best example is the Westin Hotel, but there are many examples. We sold $23 million in bonds for the Westin Hotel, and every year we have to make the payment like you do a mortgage payment on those bonds, and that is budgeted in the TIF funds as well.
On the Crossroads TIF, Michael, that expires the end of 2019?
It does.
Thank you.
Yes, and
Mike?
Yeah.
Foreign fire tax, we really don't have any control over. That's a fire department function. Is it proper that it's shown on here?
It's shown on here because it's part of our overall budget, but you're right, we don't have control over that. It's managed by the Foreign Fire Insurance Board, and they're able to use that tax revenue for purposes that benefit the fire department.
If they don't use every dollar of it, what happens to it?
It remains in their account. They actually do have a separate bank account for that. That's one of the few. And it remains in their account, and they can just use it the following year.
So how do you justify, are we just giving this to the fire department then?
It goes to them. So there's, roughly $70,000 of revenue that comes in every year, and it goes to the Foreign Fire Insurance Board.
To us?
Comes to us, but we hand it over to them.
Okay, thank you.
And that's a requirement.
That's a requirement.
State statute.
Yeah.
So, Michael, I got a question on Crossroads. So walk us through, expires next year, It's our first TIF that we've had expire.
Right.
So walk us through what that process is. Is there any funds that can be transferred out of it?
Yes.
Do they all have to be used up within that TIF? And then going forward, once it expires, what will the tax implications be?
So that's a really good question, and can I ask you to hold it until later in the presentation? Because I have a slide to address that.
Okay.
And if I
Thank you.
forget, remind me and I'll address it at that time.
Okay.
Okay. Sometimes the question comes up, how much money do we have? And these are our estimated ending fund balances for each of our funds at the end of 2018. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this unless you have questions, but you can see I've highlighted a few of them here. The general fund, we expect to have about $15.8 million in fund balance at the end of the year. We have a policy that says we have to maintain at least 25% of annual operating expenses, so you can see that we're well above that at 42%. This assumes that the surplus that we expect to exist at the end of 2018 will go to fund balance, but the village board has the ability pursuant to a financial policy that you approved a few years ago to use that money for SURF purposes or for the police and fire and IMRF pension funds. So if we end up with $1 million surplus as we expect, and you decide to contribute that to the pension funds, then this number would be obviously less than 15.8 million. And then you can see we have, various amounts in each of our funds. I'll call your attention to the police and fire pension funds, which now have combined almost $100 million in assets. And we don't spend a lot of time talking about the police and fire pension funds, but that has a direct impact on our property tax levy every year. And so how they invest those funds and how they manage those funds is very important. And there is a police and fire pension board that is in charge of that, and they do a very good job of investing those funds and trying to get the best return they can on those assets.
Michael, can you briefly explain why the municipal pension fund isn't listed here?
Yes. The reason is because the state, the municipal fund, and you're referring to the fund that includes all the non-sworn employees who are participants of the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. That's a fund that's maintained and operated by IMRF. And so we make a contribution every year, the employer contribution, and the employees contribute to it as well, but it's not on our financial statements.
It's controlled by the state.
It's controlled by IMRF, right?
Can you repeat that, though? I think that's an excellent point that people don't understand. It is not controlled by the state. It is controlled privately by IMRF.
Right. IMRF is not subject to state appropriations, but they are subject to state law, which dictates what the benefits are and so forth. But that money is held separately and cannot be taken by the state of Illinois for other purposes.
Thanks.
And the same thing, by the way, is true of our police and fire pension funds, which are trust funds. We include it in our budget, but we have no ability to access those funds, and I think most of the employees and retirees would say that is a good thing, so.
Michael,
Yeah,
do you serve on any of the boards that govern these funds?
I do. I serve on both the police and fire pension boards.
It's comforting, thank you.
Thanks. So as you can see, there's other funds, and I won't go into detail unless anybody has any specific questions. Okay, so now it's time for our next quiz question. And this one actually counts. So if everybody's ready, here we go. The question is, Milwaukee Avenue was once a stagecoach route between Chicago and what city in Wisconsin? We We have 15 seconds left. And as you're answering, I'll just tell you that a lot of these questions came from the Wheeling Historical Society's website, so they deserve the credit for this. And the answer is Green Bay. And wow, only 3 of you knew that. No, most people thought it was Milwaukee.
Did you press the wrong button?
Great, there's 3 people in the room that know the answers. I
And here
waited
we go,
until the
yes.
end to not,
And our assistant manager is in first place.
He really wants that candy. He really wants that candy. We changed the prizes, Mike.
Right. So we
You
will
get
come
to
back.
take over, you get to take over for Mr. Monchain if you win.
You
Right.
spend more time assistant managing instead of playing games.
That's right.
Okay, so our projected results are good. As the manager indicated earlier, we expected that we were going to have an $8,000 surplus. That was what we budgeted. We now believe it's going to be over $1 million. And as I mentioned, that would increase our ending fund balance percentage to 42% or $15.8 million. And the question that always comes up from the manager, he asked me this year, Mondo, sometimes he calls me Mondo, how did you mess that up? You said we were going to have an $8,000 surplus, and in essence, now you're saying it's going to be over $1 million. What did you do? And we ended up really having a great year, and the reasons are listed here, and I'll just go through a few of them. Sales tax and telecom tax were actually down compared to what we budgeted, and the reasons for that are because of Sam's Club closing, the airport, we're going to lose a portion or all of our sales tax related to fuel sales at the airport. Online sales continue to have an impact on sales tax as more people shop at Amazon and other websites. And the other factor that played into sales tax was that our administration fee was lowered by the state from 2% to 1.5%, so we actually picked up a little bit of sales tax revenue there. But when you add that all together, we were down about $507,000 as a result of those factors. Telecom tax, we talked about before. That continues to drop every year for the reasons that I already mentioned. 911 revenue was up because the state increased the per line fee from 87 cents to $1.50, and they passed on most of that revenue to the municipalities, which we did not expect to happen, and so we did not budget for it. We thought that the state was going to keep a lot of that money for themselves, but so far they've been distributing it, almost all of it, to us, and that was a $270,000 pickup.
Do we think that'll change?
We're worried. It may change. So we're not, when our manager talked about surplus and what that really means, that's really what he's referring to is, we have a surplus, we're happy to have it. We don't know if that's going to continue because the state can change state statute and their budget whenever they want to. Building permits were up because we had a large unanticipated project that we did not budget for. Income tax, the state cut the amount that they cut from 10% to 5%, so if that makes sense. They had been withholding 10% of our income tax revenue. They reduced that when they approved their budget in July to 5%, so we actually picked up some revenue. The board approved an increase in ambulance fees, and that was not budgeted. And then there's some other items here that you can see on the slide that we had a pickup compared to what we budgeted. The last one is the interest earnings are up because interest rates are up, so we're earning more money on our investments.
The 9/11 fees go directly to that fund?
Yes. And they're required to do that. And we get not only the village's share, but also Des Plaines' share of 911 revenue.
And then we pay Des Plaines?
And then we give it back to them. Yeah. So to summarize, revenue was up about $779,000 over budget. Expenditures are less than what we anticipated because of retirements and health insurance premiums not going up quite as much as we expected. And so the bottom line is that $1,051,000. And as I noted at the bottom, that creates another opportunity at the end of the year to contribute this money to the pension funds as we have in prior years. So the moral of the story is that when we prepare the budget, we're preparing it as much as a year and a half before the end of the fiscal year. And it's very difficult to anticipate everything that's going to happen. The economy can change a lot in that time. The state can do things that we don't expect, and that can impact us. We can have a business move into town or go out of business like we did with Sam's Club. And so we get really close, but we can't always get exactly there in terms of what we budgeted. And so this is a history of our general fund results for the last few years going back to 2011. And as you will see, we have 4 consecutive years of balanced or surplus budgets. That wasn't always the case. And that's why we are feeling better about where we're at now than we have in a long time. And our fund balances going back to 2011 have remained relatively stable. It was at 52% back in 2011, and it dropped as a result of the effect of the economy back then. But we have, because we've been passing balanced budgets, you can see that line is very straight going across, which is a good thing. And now it is time for the next question that you've all been waiting for. And so if you're all ready, here we go. And the question is, what did residents begin hunting in 1931 because they scared blackberry pickers? This is courtesy of the Wheeling Historical Society. So you have about 10 seconds left. And we have someone in the audience who's giving away the answers. Okay.
I'm taking your phone away.
So the answer is rattlesnake. And 18 of you got that right, so very good. And here's the updated scores. And our village manager and our assistant village manager are leading the pack. Now, some might think
I'm waiting until there's 1 second left before I hit that button.
some might think that they had access to the questions beforehand. I don't know, we'll have to have an investigation later. Okay. So I just wanted to show you some revenue trends. And in terms of state sales tax, you can see that generally speaking for the last several years it has not been growing, and for 2018 we expect it to be down significantly, and that is the effect of Sam's Club primarily. This is just the 1% share. Wheeling gets 2% of the sales tax rate, but and this excludes one-time large use tax related transactions, so it's apples to apples. But you can see that this is an ongoing issue for the village, not just Wheeling, but just about every municipality is struggling with sales tax not growing.
Can I just make a point? Can you go back to that?
Sure.
When we talk about other sources of revenue, we have in the past talked about the three-legged stool, sales tax, income tax, property tax. Again, just to reiterate the point, I mean, look at this graph. There's been negative growth over the last 10 years in what is one leg of a three-legged stool. So when we talk about reliance on other revenue sources, I think it's important that everyone remember how significant this is and how somewhat out of our control this is, because there is no mall. There is limited retail in our community. And I think that's important when we talk about the bigger picture as we move forward.
This continues to be a challenge for us, and it's one of the reasons why the village, and again, not just Wheeling, ends up having to increase its property tax levy each year, because if the money's not coming in from sales tax and income tax, and costs are going up, obviously, it has to come from somewhere.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
So the loss of Sam's Club, obviously made a big impact. But didn't the previous 20 years that we had Sam's Club, was it 20? That probably more than made up for the loss that we're experiencing now? Wouldn't it, so in other words, isn't it better to have had it and have love and lost
Yes.
than no love at all?
Yes, we would have run, our results in prior years would not have been as good without Sam's Club. That's, they were definitely an important factor in our ability to try to balance our budget every year.
But needless to say, we don't want to have too many big boxes that we eventually lose, because big boxes tend to close as opposed to someone else moving in when they
Right,
shut down. So it pretty much, they don't get repurposed all that often.
right. Yeah, it's a very important part of our revenue base.
What was their amount, Michael? What was the amount of sales tax Sam's on average last
So I
5 years?
can't tell you that because it's a felony.
Oh.
We have police
Nice try,
officers
Joe.
in the room.
Fair
that,
enough.
I don't want to mess with our police chief.
The category, though, that included, 4 or 5 other items and Sam's Club it was on the slide previous, it was
Right.
500 and...
507, but that included a number of different items. But yeah, we signed a confidentiality agreement with the state of Illinois because it's considered confidential information to the business. We're not allowed to release that. We do know what it is, but
Even once they close.
even once they close.
So what was the number before they were there, and the number after they were there?
20 years ago?
Plus or minus inflation.
Right, plus or minus inflation.
So this next slide shows our top 10 sales tax producers by year, and it's just a different way of looking at sales tax. In 2017, these top 10 producers accounted for 44% of Wheeling's sales tax collection. So to Trustee Lang's point, if you lose a major sales tax remitter, it has a dramatic effect on your budget. And that's, of course, what happened in the last year. But you can see that those top 10 remitters their sales tax collections are not growing either, which is what you would expect. And then income tax is the same story. That's the second of our 3 largest sources of revenue, and that is a very flat trend line. You can see that actually in 2018, we expect to receive less income tax revenue than we received in 2008, and that's not even adjusted for inflation, that's actual dollars. So that is what creates so much pressure every year to reduce costs and increase our tax levy.
With the influx of Town Center and Uptown 500 and Northgate Crossing and Wingspan, so that we have more homes and more people earning money, will that help us, hopefully?
Absolutely, it'll definitely help with sales tax and food and beverage tax.
What about income tax?
But not income tax, because income tax is collected by the state of Illinois. It consists of the income tax on people, and then the income tax on corporations, and it goes into one pot that's distributed on a per capita basis. So it has nothing to do with the income that's generated in Wheeling. It's statewide, and we get our per capita share of it.
Thank you.
So this is, again, as was the case with sales tax, a problem that every municipality is struggling with, because they all get their same per capita share, and no one is seeing any growth.
You don't anticipate an increase based on the fact that they increased the rate?
No,
State
because
did?
they decided to keep that for themselves.
Oh, I
So,
see, all right.
They did not increase the share that's going to local government. And then, just to try to drive home the point that people are now purchasing more items on the internet than they are at brick and mortar stores, I thought this is kind of interesting because it shows a comparison between sales tax and local use tax by year. Local use tax is what the village receives when you buy something at Amazon.com. And sales tax, of course, is what we get when you go to Target or Walmart. And so you can see that our sales tax has actually been dropping in the last few years, but local use tax is going up substantially year to year, and that's because of online sales. And recently, the United States Supreme Court in the Wayfair decision ruled that states can tax internet sales, and so we do expect to receive an increase in our local use tax as a result of that, but we're told by the Department of Revenue not to expect probably more than about $50,000 or $100,000 a year. And since local use tax is only about $1.1 million worth of our budget, and sales tax is over $9 million, when people shop on the internet, it really hurts us in terms of what the revenue that we receive. So go to Target and go to Walmart.
When people use Grubhub or whatever to have food delivered to their home versus going and sitting down in a restaurant, does that affect our food and beverage tax at all? Or do we get that?
I don't believe, it's a good question. I don't believe we collect our food and beverage tax if the restaurant was outside of Wheeling. If it's in Wheeling, then I would expect that they would be collecting that.
Because I think more and more people are going that route.
Right.
And I am
Right,
concerned.
but that's something we should look into.
Yeah, I actually had this conversation recently. The answer is it's point of sale. So it doesn't matter where it's going, it matters where it was ordered. So if you order from Nino's, we're not getting anything. But so it's point of sale.
Right, so if they're ordering from a Wheeling restaurant, we get it. But if they order from outside Wheeling, we don't.
Michael?
Yeah.
When you're ordering online, say the product is coming from California or something, but they do collect taxes, how do we get that money?
So when you order from online and it's outside of Illinois, they're now required to collect Illinois' 6.25% use tax rate, which is what you will typically be charged. That money goes to the state of Illinois. I think I actually have a slide.
Yeah, it's 2 slides up.
It's 2 slides up?
One more.
Okay. Well, actually, this
There it
is
is, yeah.
a good example. So Trustee Brady, to answer your question, I anticipated that you would ask this question. And I put together this slide. And so what is the difference between Walmart and Amazon? If you purchase $500 worth of stuff at Walmart in Wheeling, you pay 10% sales tax. And that means you would pay $50 on that purchase. And so the state gets half of that 10% or 5 percentage points, which equals $25. Village of Wheeling gets 2 percentage points, which is $10. And that's significant revenue. If you spend $500 at Amazon or any other website for that matter, they do not collect sales tax. So what they collect is the state's use tax on out-of-state purchases. And this gets to your question, Trustee Brady. So instead of paying $50, the customer would pay $31.25. And the state has set this up so that they are made whole, whether you buy in Illinois or outside of Illinois on the internet, they still get their same $25. But the other $6.25 goes into a pool for distribution to units of local government, much like income tax is distributed. And we get a per capita share. So in essence, what that relates to mathematically is 0.37%, which is less than 1%, obviously, of 625. We get less than 3 cents on a purchase that we would have gotten $10 for. It's really incredible. And so that's why you see that our sales tax numbers, that's really the primary reason I think that our sales tax numbers are not growing. So the message is shop in Wheeling and not from your home computer. Okay. And then again, here's a slide, I've shown this to you in the past, but it shows all of our major sources of general fund revenue with the exception of property tax, comparing 2018 to 2008. And same story, not any growth. Again, these numbers are real dollars, not adjusted for inflation, and this is what makes it so difficult to balance our budget every year. And again, to Trustee Papanto's question earlier, you know, telecom tax is down substantially. Our cable TV franchise fees are up, but that's only because we now have more than one cable TV provider. So we're getting more than we did 10 years ago, but we don't expect that to grow much. And we've had some pickups in terms of TIF surplus dollars. We've been distributing more money than we used to. So that's the bottom line. And then on the expenditure side, these are just some examples of salaries that have changed from 2008 to 2018, and health insurance benefits and pension costs and so forth. And you can see that on average, our expenditures are going up a little over 5% a year. When your revenue is not increasing at all and your expenditures are going up 5% a year, that's not a good equation. And that's why we have had to increase the property tax levy fairly significantly since 2008.
And eliminate 44 positions.
And eliminated 44 positions, right. Okay, so before we talk, excuse me, about the tax levy, we'll do another question. So if you're all ready, here we go. So the 2019 general fund budget is $38.6 million. What was it 25 years ago in 1994? You have about 10 seconds to go. Okay, and the answer was 11,246,000, and 4 of you got that right. So that's pretty amazing when you think that it's gone from 11 million to 38 million, even despite the fact that we have cut 44 positions. Excuse me. I guess I'm going to lose my voice too. And here we go. So the assistant manager is still leading. And I don't know who some of these other people are. I don't know if they're real names or made-up names. But that is the status so far. Okay, so going back to the presentation. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the property tax levy. We have proposed an increase next year of 3.5%, which equates to about $540,000. Now, if the board approves that, boy, I don't know if I'm going to make it.
Does that choke you up?
Yeah, it chokes me up, thank you. If the board approves that, it's going to increase our surplus from $170,000 to $710,000. But we believe that incremental increases are necessary to the tax levy each year so that we can avoid deficits in future years. I've always said that I don't worry too much about what happens with 1 year in terms of the budget because we have a lot of money in reserves, and if we draw down on that reserve a little bit in 1 year, it's not necessarily a problem, but I'm more concerned with the long-term trend. And that's what this next slide shows. So if, for instance, the board were to decide not to do property tax increases for the next 5 years, we expect that we would be able to balance the budget for the next 2 years, but then you can see we would have rather substantial deficits in future years. And again, it's simply because we expect expenditures to grow at a much faster pace than revenues. So to avoid this scenario, we believe it's better to do small incremental increases to the tax levy each year as opposed to having to do very large increases to the tax levy in future years.
Michael?
Yes.
Question on that. So, we have a slow and steady increase to the levy, but you look on the upcoming referendum for District 21, Harper has something for funding as well. So what can the residents expect going forward as an increase on their taxes?
Right.
And, because it points back to Village of Wheeling as generating this tax bill, and that's not the case. We're just a portion of that bill.
Right. That's right. Most of the tax bill goes to the other taxing districts, primarily the school districts. I should say that the village is the only home rule taxing district of all the districts that tax you on your property. The rest are special taxing districts that are subject to the tax cap. And the tax cap this year is 2.1%. So except in unusual circumstances where they've gone, a district has gone to referendum and sold bonds, they cannot increase their tax levy by more than the property tax cap. So you should expect that about 86% of your tax bill will not increase by more than 2.1%. And then you have the village's 13 or 14% share, and we're recommending a 3.5% increase. So that combined is probably an increase of less than 3%. Now, to your point about District 21 and Harper, District 21 is proposing a $69 million bond sale. If that passes, they're going to be able to increase their levy more than 2.1%. So whether it passes or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
But that could have an effect.
Okay, so there will be a noticeable difference going forward in general on our residents' tax bill, homeowners.
If that referendum passes.
Yeah.
And the district has put out information showing what the impact is of their bond sale. And I believe it was like $19 per 100,000 or something like that.
And later in the presentation, we're going to talk about EAV and the effect of EAV on your property tax bill, because to the point you just made, there could be increases to the taxes, but not necessarily an increase to the homeowner and what they pay. Conversely, as we've seen in the past, there have been times when there are zero increases, say from our end, and the property tax bill goes up. And Michael has actually changed the education portion of the presentation, which is the last thing we're going to talk about, to focus on the EAV. And so a lot of what you're saying will play into the answer, well, will there be an effect on the resident? I mean, there are a lot of things at play to answer that question. And the Harper one, leaving opinion out, although that's a challenge, even if it passes, it should not affect or will not affect your property tax bill, because they are renewing the bonds that are set to retire this year, which is their sales pitch.
Got it.
Whether that's responsible or not, I guess, is up to each individual resident.
Well, and this process is great for us to, we go through this budget and pretty detailed and all that, but the bottom line for residents is what's my tax bill going to be going forward from this, and how much is, we got to educate them off of Wheeling generating this bill, because it's not, it's from the county, and so,
Right.
And we're just a portion of it.
Right.
And it still is, with our portion, still a bargain to live in this town based on what residents are paying our portion of the tax bill, I believe.
Correct. I agree.
So, okay.
Michael, if there is a surplus, our policy on a normal basis is that surplus goes to either SURF and/or pension. And we are obligated by the state to be 90% funded on our pensions in 2040. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So even if we do come up with a surplus, it's not extra money that we're playing with. We're working on that obligation.
Right, that's right. And I've always said that, if we're wrong about our budget estimates and we do end up with a surplus, the money is going to be put to good use. And as you pointed out, primarily the board has chosen to put that money to put it in the pension funds to reduce our long-term liability. And so it's not as if we're collecting dollars that we're then wasting.
And right now, what is our percentage on funding on the pension funds, police and fire in particular, roughly?
Roughly 60 or 70%, and I'm going to talk about that too. So
Thanks.
I'll be able to give you the exact numbers in a couple minutes. This is a different scenario that shows property tax increases of 3.5% in 2019, and then increasing by 0.5% each year thereafter. It's just one scenario. There are 1,000 different ways that you can come up, ideas or assumptions you can come up with, but I did this to show that if we do incremental increases to the levy each year for the next 5 years, we can essentially balance the budget in each of those 5 years. And I realize in 2023 it shows a small deficit, but that's too far out to be accurate. So it's enough to say that we can balance the budget in each of these years. It's not to say that things won't change and that this scenario will, for a fact, I know it will change, but it's just one example. This compares the property tax levy in 2018 to 2004. And I've shown this in years past, but I think it bears repeating because, as you can see, our levy consists of 4 separate levies, really. It's the general fund, the debt service fund for the bonds that we've sold, and the pension funds. Really, it's police and fire that we levy for specifically. And you can see that back in 2004, 57% of the property tax dollars we collected went to the general fund. Today, that's dropped to about 51%. We spend less of our property tax collections on debt than we used to, and more money goes to our pension funds. So that's just a function of costs increasing, and so it puts pressure on the general fund. It's more difficult to balance the general fund when more of the property tax levy is going to other purposes. And I thought you might want to look at this. In 2001, the village's share of the property tax bill was 10.3%. And you can see what these other taxing districts' share of the property tax bill was as well. And to Trustee Lang's point, we collected 10% and it paid for all of these services and more. So it really was a good deal from the standpoint of the taxpayer. And then if you compare that to 2017, which is the latest information we have, the village's share of the tax bill has grown to 13.8%. And you can see, I can go back and forth between these two. You can see that the schools have gone from 63% to, 66%. But the point is that the village's share of the tax bill has gone up, and that's a function of, as I've said several times now, our other sources of revenue not growing and us having to rely more on the property tax revenue to balance our budget. So as we've talked about, property tax is very important to our budget, and our expenditures increase every year, and 78% of our budget is labor. Other sources of revenue are not growing, and in essence, incremental increases to the levy will always be necessary. Absent some new large source of revenue, like a casino or a mall, Wheeling is always going to have to rely on property taxes to pay for a portion of its budget. And then, getting back to Trustee Lang's question from earlier about the Crossroads TIF. As we talked about, the TIF expires in next year, December 31st of 2019. And we estimate that when it expires, it will add $36 million in essence, new equalized assessed value to the village's base, EAV base. And so the impact of that is that the village will need to increase its levy for tax year 2019 in order to capture that new growth, all of the growth that's occurred in the Crossroads TIF since it was created in 1985. We estimate that that will be approximately, we will have to increase the levy by about 4% to capture that growth, and that it will produce $670,000 of revenue for the general fund. So, for example, if the village board decided that they were going to increase the levy next year by 4%, as just the normal levy increase to pay for increasing costs, to capture the new growth that's coming off of the Crossroads TIF, we would have to actually increase the levy by 8%. The good news is that that increase of the additional 4% will have no impact at all on our existing taxpayers because it's new growth. And so even though it may generate a headline in a newspaper that the village is increasing its levy by 8%, the reality is that the 4% that's related to the Crossroads TIF is cost neutral to our existing taxpayers. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, and we'll need to do a good job explaining that to the public as well.
Right.
Is that?
I think we'll spend a lot of time talking about it, and I'm sure I'll end up talking to a reporter or two about it as well. So,
Michael, what would happen with that money if none of the taxing districts raised any of their levies? So if everyone stayed the same and now you have this new pool of money, where would it go?
right. So that would become part of the overall tax base for Wheeling, and all of the taxing districts would continue to, approve their levies at the end of each year. What would actually happen is, in effect, the impact of the tax increases would be less. So, in effect, you could have people's tax bills go down. But at the same time, if you increase it to capture the new growth, their tax bill will not go up. So again, it has no impact on existing taxpayers. And the other taxing districts are aware of the fact that the Crossroads TIF is expiring. They've been watching that carefully too. And they're going to also be taxing that new growth to take advantage of the additional revenue that it'll produce. So it won't be just Wheeling who's considering doing that. It'll also be the school districts and everyone else. Towards the end of our meeting today, as the manager indicated, we want to talk about a couple potential new sources of revenue, a health inspection fee for high, medium, and low-risk establishments, which we can get into a little bit more in detail later, a possible amusement tax on movie theaters, because as you know, as part of the town center development, we're going to have a new movie theater. And it is very common for communities in this area who have movie theaters for them to tax movie tickets. Typically, it's a range of 3 to 6% of the admission fee. Although one movie theater in the area, and that's the Regal Lincolnshire Theater, actually, well, I should say Lincolnshire has just a 25-cent per ticket fee. It's not a percentage-based fee. And the reason that I'm aware of that is because I actually happen to have a relative who works for the Regal Theater in Lincolnshire, and he shared that information. No, actually, I just looked it up. But that is a picture of Leo working at the Regal Theater in Lincolnshire. And as you can see, he's not real happy about me taking that picture. And just as an aside, that wasn't the only picture I took of him as I was ordering my popcorn that night. And there was, at some point, a manager who was about 17 years old came over and said to me, "Sir, you cannot take pictures in here." And I said, okay, I'm sorry. And later, Leo told me that they thought that I was some kind of child predator that was taking pictures of the teenagers that are working behind the counter there. And he had to explain to the manager of the theater there that, in fact, I am not a child predator, but I'm just somebody who has made it my mission in life to embarrass him in any way possible. So,
Michael,
yeah.
I have a question about the amusement tax. What impact would online ticket purchasing have, just like online sales?
That's something we're going to have to look into. I'm not sure if they would be collecting our tax or not. I don't know if you know, Jim.
I don't, but I think the tax would apply. It applies to admissions for the movie theater, and it also applies to other types of amusements as well. But your biggest source of revenue would be through the movie theater. I don't think the online purchase would
change that.
change that at all.
Michael, you say tax the ticket. We will get the revenue off of the sales of popcorn, candy, popping at there.
Yes,
Because the ticket's the cheapest part getting in.
right.
I mean, you can spend $15 on a ticket, $25 on popcorn and a drink or something.
Right.
So
We'll get sales tax.
that in itself would be, I don't want to overtax any particular industry, but I don't know.
This normal sales tax rate in Wheeling would apply to the concession sales, and then if the board chooses to do so, we would also have an amusement tax that applies to the ticket sales.
Jim, is that amusement tax statutorily defined for other things, or we define it as just theaters? Or once we do that, we have to do anything that falls under that scope?
Well, you're home rule, so you've got latitude, but it typically in most ordinances, it applies to any type of amusement that you're witnessing. It could apply to a sporting event, could apply to a theater production, a musical, a movie theater. It's pretty broadly defined in most of the ordinances we see from the local municipalities in the area.
We still draft it, though.
We do draft it, yes.
Okay, so we are going to seek consensus from the board on those items later. And now it's time for another question. And if you're ready, here we go. So the question is, what was the starting pay for a firefighter in 1995? You have about 15 seconds left. Okay, and the answer is $29,989, and 5 people got that right. And here are the updated results. And it is not good for the assistant manager who is dropping like a rock.
You must phrase it in a form of question.
Okay, really quickly, these are the items that are included in the 2019 budget. We can come back to this later. We have significant capital improvement projects that are budgeted for next year. If anybody has questions later, we can certainly address
And of
them.
course, the CIP comes to you separately from the budget, so we're not just glossing over this. There's a whole separate presentation for the CIP.
Right. And then we have expanded level requests that were approved by the village manager, in total $112,000. We can talk about those later. And also expanded level requests that were not approved by the village manager, in total nearly $95,000. Overtime is always a topic that people are interested in, and I think, as you can see, that's also a very flat line. It hasn't increased really since 2014, and that's due to the departments managing their overtime very well.
I'd like to just interject and remind the board that some of this is intentional, that while this number is significant, it also is a purposeful decision in some cases, that it is cheaper to pay overtime than it is to hire new employees. So while, of course, emergency response is one of the main things that we do here and responsible for a majority of the overtime, there is a good portion of this that is intentional in that it's a business decision. It's cheaper to pay overtime than it is to hire more bodies.
Our liability insurance program is working very well. And again, the credit for this goes to our departments who have always emphasized safety and safety training. And as you will see, in the last 4 years, our claims, our losses have been below our average for the last 10 years. We are self-funded for liability insurance purposes. We fund to certain dollar amounts, and then we purchase excess insurance above those specific dollar amounts. Occasionally, we have a bad year, like 2009 or 11 or 13, which is to be expected. With a liability insurance program, you're going to have good years and you're going to have bad years, but on balance, we're doing really well. And this is very important because it directly impacts the general fund in terms of how much money we have to put into the liability fund each year. And our contribution to the liability fund for 2019 is significantly less than it has been in prior years because of our excellent claim history. The water and sewer budget includes a recommended 2.5% incremental increase to the water and sewer rates from $7.59 to $7.78. It would cost the average resident using 7,000 gallons per month. I actually think the average resident is now using less than 7,000 gallons a month, but it would cost $15.96 a month. I'm sorry, a year, not a month. And those cost increases are necessary to continue to pay for our operating costs and our capital costs as well. We do expect that new development projects will increase our water and sewer revenue.
Michael,
Yeah.
we've seen a decrease. Do we think that's because people are being more environmentally friendly and using less water, or is it just less to water?
That's a national trend that it's not just Wheeling, but there are many water-saving devices that people are using, toilets and showers and things like that, that do not use as much water as they used to many years ago. And so just about every community, not just in Illinois, but across the country, is seeing a drop in the number of gallons of water that they're selling for those reasons.
Not to
And,
forget,
I'm sorry, we are part of the Northwest Water Commission that was formed in the 80s?
1985.
Right. The commission as a whole has done quite well for its participants as far as water rates. Am I correct?
Yes, significantly. The water rates for the participating communities, which is Wheeling, Arlington Heights, Palatine, and Buffalo Grove, are substantially lower than any other consortium or the city of Chicago, certainly.
Thank you.
I would
Question?
like to say that the 2018 water use is basically on kind of, it was an extremely wet year.
Yes.
Nobody had to water their lawns, their flowers, you know,
Right.
so that's a big impact. Now, we don't know what 2019 is going to bring.
That's right. And that's why I think you see from this chart that we expect our sales to be much lower this year than they have been in prior years for exactly that reason.
So safeguarding our future with water, we are looking at getting a second straw eventually.
Yeah, the commission is exploring a number of options to do that, to create redundancy and to potentially think about additional customers. All of that is very preliminary at this point, but yes, the commission is going through a number of financial analysis to see what makes the most sense to protect the water rate for the original communities. Again, Arlington, Wheeling, Palatine, Buffalo Grove.
Okay, and so, and that will be a significant expense to pipe in water through a second source through into Wheeling or this area?
The general answer is yes, but the swing between what the options are is incredible. So, right, the answer is yes, it would. They're substantial projects, but we have to do the cost-benefit analysis of what makes the most sense.
Right, but then you mentioned the most important point is allowing more customers in other communities to then, that consortium takes on more customers and sells more water to others. Is that correct? And that'll help offset.
It is, but this is very premature. The theory is yes, but there's a lot that goes into that we will talk about as I have more information.
If you had to throw a date of when something like that would happen, when would?
30 years. Construction of a pipeline like that is 15 years alone. It's probably another 10 years just in permitting. So I'm not even exaggerating. It would be at least 25 to 30 years.
Good to know.
Before we were. Yeah, this is, we talked earlier about 5 to 10 years. This is 50 to 100 years. When you're talking about water, you're talking 50 to 100 years out.
And somebody's got to pay for that pipe.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, and then, as we mentioned earlier, we have a stormwater fund that we created a few years ago to pay for stormwater mitigation-related projects. We started at $2 per ERU, and we have been increasing it by 25 cents each year. Our rate is substantially less than our neighboring communities that have a stormwater fee, but we did that intentionally to make it easier for the businesses in Wheeling to be able to afford this fee. There are businesses that have significant amounts of impervious area. And so our recommendation this year is to go up by 25 cents again to $2.75 per ERU, and that would generate another $74,000 of revenue annually. And as I showed before, we have a number of stormwater projects that are budgeted. So this money goes strictly to that purpose.
Michael?
Yep.
Didn't I just read an article about Libertyville and their stormwater fee, and one of their proposals was something ridiculously high, like $45 a month?
Yeah, I read the same article, and I could not believe that, and Brian did as well. Yeah, $40-something a month per resident. So at $275, we look pretty good.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
You know.
And just for the public's edification, that's 1 ERU. A residential lot is equal to 1 ERU.
Right.
So it's not, there's no magic in the formula there. It's 1 to 1
Right.
for a resident.
How do we bill that, Michael? Is that part of the levy, or does it come with
It's
a water
on
bill?
the
or?
water bills.
Okay.
Very quickly, the SURF fund, we've talked about a lot in years past. We have $1.8 million budgeted for next year for the eventual replacement of our capital equipment. The SURF fund includes 245 separate assets, fire trucks and squad cars and pickup trucks and all that kind of stuff. And the replacement value for all of those items is about $19.1 million. So our ending SURF balance for 2018 is expected to be about $7 million. This is a very important tool that the board back in 1990 implemented to allow us to avoid having to borrow to pay for capital equipment when it needs to be replaced, and it's worked very well since then. Okay, time for another question. So here we go. And the question is, who or what did children once wait to see on summer evenings in Wheeling? And this is also courtesy of the Wheeling Historical Society. So we have about 10 seconds left to get your answers in. Okay, and 11 of you knew it was the lamplighter, which I thought was kind of interesting, actually. And so let's see where that puts us. Well, we have a new first place person, Darren, at 3,429. But it's close. And again, the top 3 finishers are going to get fabulous prizes.
How far back did he go?
Would anybody like to take a break at this point while we have a new leader? Would anybody? Okay, we'll take a 15-minute recess. Sounds good? Don't mean to cut you off there, Mike, but. Okay, so I'd like to call for a recess at 10 after 10, 15 minutes. Motion?
So moved.
Second?
Who was first, Brady?
Yeah,
Who's second? Second?
Capantos.
Passes. Okay, thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Be back at, 15, I don't know, what, 20?
Senior Center.
But that's gone, got moved to North.
Yeah, I know. She was. Why is it there?
All right, thank you all for coming back. I'd like to call the meeting back to order.
Exactly right.
Motion, please.
So moved.
I'll give that to Mary Kruger and the second to Mary Pantos. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Munche.
Okay, so moving on, I just wanted to highlight some of the accomplishments for the village for the last year. And our bond rating continues to be strong, one of the highest levels given out by Fitch and S&P. We have not issued any new tax levy-related debt in 9 years, which is great. We continue to pay for capital equipment replacement on a pay-as-you-go basis, and the same is true of capital improvement projects. So we're not borrowing for those things. As we mentioned before, liability and workers' comp claims have been lower than average for 4 years in a row, and our pension funding is up from last year, and you can see that that's across the board, police, fire, and significantly with IMRF. And then, of course, community development, this is by department. Community development had the achievement related to Fox Point, and those residents have been relocated to safer homes. Public Works continues to manage a multi-million-dollar infrastructure program. Finance received the Distinguished Budget Award and Certificate of Achievement again for 2018 and 2017. The police department trained over 25% of our officers as State of Illinois Certified Crisis Intervention Officers. Our dispatching center became one of only 18 in Illinois to be certified in the Missing Kids Readiness Program. Fire department received a $123,000 FEMA grant for a radio purchase. And Human Services successfully transferred senior recreation programming to the Wheeling Park District. And then, of course, we have the Town Center project and Uptown 500 and Boston Fish Market opening soon. The Wolf Crossing townhomes, and even though it's a Park District program, the renovation project is definitely something that the community can take a lot of pride in. And so it's time for another question. And I understand that there was a mistake in one of the earlier questions and that there were actually 2 answers to the firefighter question. So if you got it right, good, and if you didn't, sorry.
It's only candy.
Right. Okay, so our next question is, in 2004, the village sold more water than any year since. How much water was sold that year? You have 10 seconds to answer. Okay. And the answer is 1.6 billion gallons were sold back in 2004. We had 4 people get that right. And this goes to Trustee Papanto's question earlier that because of conservation efforts and more efficient appliances and so forth, we've dropped to about 1.2 billion now from 1.6. So let's see how we're doing. Okay, well, ACJ is our new leader, and you can see how we're doing from there. Okay, so I want to finish up with a couple of key topics, and that is TIF districts and pensions. And I think that we, to use a pun, are at a crossroads in terms of where we're at with our TIF districts. And just to give a little bit of history, the TIFs were first created in California in the 1950s and then in Illinois in 1977. Wheeling created their first TIF district, the Crossroads TIF, in '85. And generally speaking, for major TIF projects, the village has always adhered to a pay-as-you-go incentive approach. So where we have given incentives to developers, we have not done so with existing increment that's generated by the TIF districts. We have said to the developers, we will give you a portion of the increment that your project generates as an incentive to build the project and overcome extraordinary costs and so forth. So the examples are, of course, the Weston, Prairie Park, Fresh Farms, Northgate Crossings, and so forth. I think now that it is 2018 and the Crossroads TIF is coming to an end, we have an opportunity to use the success of our TIF districts to benefit the village's existing taxpayers, meaning both residents and businesses. And the way to do that is to really declare success and spike the football and continue to fund projects where appropriate, but using the pay-as-you-go model. I also think that it would be appropriate to continue to declare surpluses whenever possible so that the village can capture that money in its general fund and use it to offset the need for what would otherwise be a larger increase in the tax levy.
Could you please explain that? Because there's a lot of people who are unclear about it's tax dollars that comes to the village. What do you mean?
Right. So when we create a TIF district, all of the homes and businesses in the TIF district, the EAV for those homes and businesses is frozen and forms the base. And as the EAV increases, any tax dollars related to that increase becomes increment that goes into the TIF district funds and can only be spent for economic development purposes, such as incentivizing some of the projects that I mentioned. At some point, though, that money that goes into the TIF districts goes into the TIF district funds does not benefit the village's general fund at all. It can only be spent on economic development, not on salaries of police officers and firefighters and so forth. So unless we end the TIF district or we declare a surplus every year, we can't capture that growth for our operating purposes. And we started declaring surpluses back in 2005, as I mentioned, but now we have a situation in two of our TIF districts, the Lake Cook TIF, the North TIF, and the South Milwaukee TIF, where they are generating significant surplus increment that is not needed for any existing development project. And so there is an opportunity to declare additional surpluses going forward, which represents a new source of revenue for the general fund.
And for all the other taxing.
And for all the other taxing districts. So I really see this as a huge benefit to the community because we're all in this together, and the school districts and the park district and so forth are very important to the village of Wheeling as a whole. And when we declare surpluses, they're able to use that money for building a renovation project or hiring more teachers or whatever they do. And it's important that they have access to that money if we are not planning on using it for any other purpose. So I think it's important also that where appropriate, we follow what I call the Whitley model. And that is that when the Whitley project came before the board approved a redevelopment agreement that not only did not incentivize that project in the form of TIF dollars, it actually created a new model where they pay us rather than we're paying them. And the way that worked is we included language in the RDA that says that after 17 ambulance calls, they pay the full cost of the ambulance call. And I don't know if the board realized it at the time, but that was actually somewhat revolutionary in the TIF world, because I don't know of a lot of communities that have actually done that. where they've actually said to a development that may be something that the village desires to have in its community, but will also create a burden on public services, specifically police and fire, that we're not going to pay you to build that project. We're going to go along, we're going to, allow you to build it, but we're not going to pay you to build it. And in fact, because you're creating a burden for the existing taxpayers, we're going to ask you to pay us to offset some of those costs. I think that's something that the board should consider in the future as it considers new projects that come before it.
Michael? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry.
once upon a time, prior to TIFs, developers came into town and they actually paid us and gave us land for park use or something else like that to be able to develop in our town. Then it seemed like TIF came along and the tables turned. And then we are using TIF money to sort of pay them to incentivize their project. So completely, they used to be paying us, now we're paying them.
Right.
But it seems the trend in the future is that TIFs are not being relied upon. I think they're hugely important to improvements in a community. I mean, look at what we've done to this community based on TIFs.
Right.
But it seems going forward that all the other taxing bodies really are putting up a wall on TIFs, and it seems like they are going out of favor. Is that pretty?
I think it's getting to be more difficult to create a TIF district. There's more attention paid to TIF districts than there were in the past. And some of the other taxing districts are looking to villages and cities to enter into these agreements where they agree that after the project is paid for, whatever that project is, that the village will then declare a surplus rather than just accumulate that money.
And we've been pretty fortunate with utilizing most of our TIF districts to build out areas that were blighted and so on. So I think we've done a pretty good job at it. But do you think even going forward then, if TIFs are no longer in favor in the future, that once we start running out of the deadlines on them and start closing them down years from now,
I think it looks like you want to say
do you think we'll get to a point where, it'll swap back to where developers are then paying us again to, or incentivizing because they want to build here?
Excellent question and excellent points. A couple of things. I think TIFs aren't falling out of favor necessarily. I think what's happening is people, meaning taxing bodies, are getting desperate. The economy is such, and the shift on revenue is such, that everyone is just trying to protect their own. And what the challenge is with that is you have to look at the bigger picture, right? TIFs are there in order to create something much larger in the future than what was there now. You have a blighted area, you have an undeveloped area. Okay, so now you have this TIF program that allows building to happen, but for the fact that you were able to incentivize the project, never would have, right? But I think people are hunkering down a little bit on, yeah, that's great, but I can't lose any more of my money today, my tax revenue today, so that's great what you want to do for the future, but I got to worry about today. I think that's what's happening more than they're falling out of favor. But as far as the Village of Wheeling goes, I think the answer to your question is we will not probably be looking for additional TIFs in the future because the ones that we have are so successful. As Michael said, I mean, look at Lake Hook in Milwaukee. Look at this project next door. None of that would have happened but for TIFs. So I do think that there is going to be a shift. And I think the more successful these projects are, the less reliant, and it's happening. Wolf Crossing came into town now, recently. The Horton project didn't ask for TIF. And I think they did that specifically because they knew that their investment was protected, because look around. Wheeling is growing. Wheeling is doing the right stuff. They didn't ask for money. So I think in that regard, you're right. I think the more successful we are with our TIF projects, the less reliant other projects will be. I don't know You know, if it'll ever really revert back to the days of they want to come to town so bad that they're willing to build a park, they're willing to, you know, build a fire station. But I do think that balance, it's going to find its equilibrium. I think the pendulum is now swinging back to right where it should be. That our role in creating a community that is valuable to the private sector has come full circle. And we can now say that we can do that. And businesses will recognize that and want to come here without incentivization.
Well, we definitely built sustainability when it comes to development here so far. It seems that some of the projects that we've done really have spurred a lot of additional growth and development. I'd like to see more around the West End, but, you know, I think this is really important out here and how much growth it has spurred. And that seems like for years to come that it could keep growing at that point. And that's good. I mean, we really took advantage of the situation in a good way.
Yes.
So,
Okay, thank you, Trustee Lang. Trustee Kruger, then Trustee Vito, then Trustee Brady. Trustee Kruger?
Thank you, President Horker. Director Mondashane, I have two questions. On the Whitley model that you mentioned, is that specifically when a development is seniors in nature, or could that model be applied to any development with bodies that would need core service support?
That was specific to that project because we entered into a redevelopment agreement with them. But I think, and I would defer to Jim on this, but I think where we are giving something, and in that case it was stormwater credits, we could ask for something in return.
There was consideration for that. If you're looking to the future with a senior facility being built, there really wouldn't be that same situation if they weren't asking. In this case, we provided valuable stormwater credits in exchange for something. I think that model would not be really workable, but for an RDA situation.
And we were beyond fair, as Michael pointed out, the threshold is 17 calls. That is well above what one would expect for a typical residential development. So it wasn't, you know, the village being too intense in its request of them. We gave them 17. And I think that that's a healthy balance of, look, we're not trying to get you to, you're already paying for service, but you're paying for a level of service. You are, by your business model, you are known to exceed that level of normal service. Therefore, above that amount, you should pay. So I think it's important to say that there was a balance built in there, and that 17 threshold, I think, is important.
Thanks. I just wanted to understand the model and how it could be applied to future development. The second question is about the Crossroads TIF, in that it is closing or coming to its end at the end of next year. And there's a TIF provision that if you have multiple TIF districts and they touch, could you expand on what that will do to our TIFs, remaining TIFs, now that there's a chunk gone?
Yes. So the way it works is if you have TIF districts that border each other, you can transfer money from one TIF district to another. So you might not need money in the Crossroads TIF in a given year, but you might need it in the town center TIF. So and we've done that. To pay for various projects and so forth. When the Crossroads TIF ends, that bridge, so to speak, to the other TIF districts goes with it. And so we will now have TIF districts that are really islands. The North TIF will not be connected to anything, and the South TIF will be off by itself and so forth.
So do you classify that as a negative impact to TIFs closing or a positive impact?
Well, from my perspective, it's negative because I would always like the flexibility of being able to take money that's in one TIF district and move it to another where it's needed. So I see that as a negative, but it's just, that's the way it goes when a
No, it's the
TIF
rules.
ends.
I mean, we'll certainly follow the rules. I want to
Right.
understand what the impact is now
Right.
that the islands will now, their TIF
They'll
TIF
have to
funds
be-
will have to be within that TIF. That's
They'll
it.
have to be
Or
self-supporting.
surplus.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Kruger. Trustee Vito?
Yeah, on the surplus issue, and maybe you'll get to it in this slide, is there anything that governs when we have to declare a surplus, or can we just hold the money in the TIF? So if we get 100,000 tax money in a project and we declare a TIF, the next year it gets 150,000, we give
Right.
20,000 for a road or something that they build. Do we have to declare that 30,000 of surplus annually, or can we just leave it there?
If we can demonstrate that we are keeping it in the fund for some specific future purpose, then we can hold on to it.
And are most of them now running all surplus, or are we still paying out a lot of things like in Crossroads in the North TIF? And
No, well, I should say the Town Center TIF and the Southeast TIF, which is at the airport, are, because they're both new TIF districts, they're really not generating any surplus to speak of. And in fact, in some instances, we may run deficits for the next few years, knowing that eventually the increment will come in to make the fund whole. But in the other TIF districts, Crossroads, North and South, those are generating consistent surpluses.
And are the surpluses distributed through an IGA, or are they distributed through the normal tax allocation of the property tax bill?
They're, in the Crossroads TIF and the South TIF, we have to declare a surplus every year because of the IGA. And we send the money to the Cook County Treasurer, who then distributes it to all the taxing districts.
Per the regular allocation, not anything that
Per
we've
whatever their
agreed to?
pro rata share is of
Okay.
the tax.
We didn't agree, like, you get X
No,
of surplus.
it's just whatever your share of the tax bill is.
And do they also get, if there's no surplus, do the schools still get, schools and parks and everything, still get a chunk of the increment, even if there's not a surplus?
Not
Or any
if we-
IGA?
If we don't declare a surplus, they're only able to tax the base that was in effect at the time we created the
Okay.
TIF district. So are there any other questions? or-
One more.
Trustee Brady and then trustee Papantos.
Michael,
Yeah.
TIF is great. It's done a lot of great things for us. It's brought some tremendous projects with the help that the developer needed on the infrastructure, or whatever it was, that was the problem. And I think we've covered just about all bases on that. And to be honest with you, some of the TIF requests that are coming in are getting a little stretched beyond what the TIF was really meant for. Guy wants to use nice brick, he wants to be paid for it. Wait a minute, no. But now you mentioned the Whitley and this ambulance thing. Could that be considered a use tax? I mean, not a use tax, what do they call that? Impact fee.
I think
Because
it's.
years ago, we used to do that, the impact fee. And if it is, why can't we be doing that on some of these other projects?
I'll defer to Jim.
Yeah, we do have impact fees relating to the school districts, the park districts, and the library districts. When development comes to town, we have an ordinance that requires impact fees to be paid to those taxing bodies. Relative to basic services, fire, police, impact fees for basic services, even in a senior facility, are really risky and probably violative of the law, because everybody's paying property taxes, right? And your property taxes are designed to cover basic services. In the case of the Whitley, they wanted something from us. They wanted valuable stormwater credits that had a dollar value. We were able to negotiate, in turn, payment for ambulance calls. But keep in mind, we bill for ambulance calls.
I know.
We don't do that for free. So when you start to talk about impact fees based on certain facilities, there's discrimination concerns, and there's concerns about whether or not that's valid under the law, given the fact that everybody, including those facilities, pay property taxes. So it's something that we haven't jumped into. I have concerns about it. We'll look at it further, but those are my initial thoughts.
I'm looking at 350 apartments. Certainly that's going to be a burden on the fire department.
Right.
And the police department, So why shouldn't they get extra money for the ambulance that they need and the 6 firefighters they need to cover in an ambulance, or the police department, because they know they're going to be directing traffic over there from time to time? It's just something that I think we should basically take a close look at it as a way to kind of ease the burden of these developments. Thank you.
Thank you, trustee Brady. Trustee Papantos?
Back to the Crossroads TIF, since it's going to end, would it be wise for us to do transfers to the south, well, to the southeast TIF via the south tip, since that one is operating at a deficit, so that for future projects, redevelopment around industrial lane, et cetera, have the funds available?
So you mean to transfer money from Crossroads to?
Right.
That's certainly an option for the board to consider before the TIF district terminates. I will tell you that there's really not a lot of money in the Crossroads TIF to transfer because of the fact that we're declaring so much of it as surplus every year. But if, to the extent that there is a balance in the fund as we approach the end of 2019, that will be a decision the board will have to make, either declare it as surplus or transfer it to another TIF district.
Don't we have to declare it a surplus per the IGA?
In the Crossroads, yeah.
Well, there's the annual increment that comes in. We have to declare 72% of that as surplus, but then there's fund balance that's accumulated, and that does not have to be declared as surplus. That could be transferred to another TIF district.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Looks good. Mr. Monstein?
So just so the board is aware, the village has actually distributed $35.2 million in surplus funds since 2005, which is an incredible figure. And of that amount, District 21 has received almost $15 million and 214 almost $8 million. The village's general fund has received $2.8 million, and the police and fire pension funds have benefited by receiving $1.1 million. So the point I was trying to make earlier is that when we declare surpluses, it really benefits the community as a whole. And one thought I had as we talk about the new strategic plan going forward is that the board may want to consider committing to declaring additional surpluses above the required surpluses that are required by our IGAs with the school districts, because in the future, and I'm referring to 2020 and beyond, we expect that there's going to be about $3.5 million of extra funds in the north and south TIF districts. This is money that is above and beyond what we need to spend on existing debt service payments or any development project. And if the village adheres to this pay-as-you-go approach, which we really have always done, then we will have the revenue that we need to declare those surpluses every year. And that becomes a new source of revenue for, of course, the school districts and the park district and the other taxing districts, but also the village. The District 21 could potentially benefit in the amount of $1.5 million a year, 754,000. But the village's general fund and police and fire pension funds could receive as much as almost $500,000 annually.
Excuse me, Michael, and when we distribute a surplus to, in particular, the school districts, that does not affect their tax cap at all, right?
Right. So it's above that, above the cap.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to show you what that could look like. And again, this assumes that we're not going to need the money for TIF-related infrastructure projects or something similar to that.
Michael, that $350,000 that goes to the general fund, that
Yes.
represents about 1.5% tax increase?
Right.
What's 1%?
Well, 1% is about
a little over
150,000, so
50,000.
2% would be 300,000.
2.25.
Yeah. So that's what I'm referring to when I say if you capture those dollars for the general fund, it lessens the need for a larger property tax increase. And so just some suggested questions that the board may want to consider going forward when developers come before you and ask you for TIF money, and just questions to ask yourself, I guess, in general is, does the village have to offer a large TIF incentive to attract developers? I think when you look at what has been accomplished in Wheeling in the last 20 years, it's incredible. And I listed some of the examples of that. And those TIF districts were absolutely necessary in order to make that happen. Those projects would not have been built without TIF assistance. And we had the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009, and no one was building anything. So you needed to incentivize developers to build those projects. But now it's 2018, the economy is great. Our community is developed in a way that is, is fantastic in terms of all the projects that we've implemented. And the question is, do we have to continue to offer those large TIF incentives, or will they build the project anyway? And as the manager indicated, like with Wolf Crossing, they went forward and they built that project without a TIF incentive. So that's just something to ask yourself. And the other question is, will this project create new revenue for the village in terms of sales tax or hotel motel tax, or will it burden existing taxpayers? Now, these developments are public-private partnerships, but I think it's okay to sometimes look at it as an us versus them type of scenario. It's not quite that harsh, but, do we want to benefit the developer's bottom line, or do we want to give some tax relief to our existing taxpayers? So again, same types of questions. And then also, are we willing to risk losing the project by not offering an incentive? And again, should we pay them or should they pay us in cases where that's appropriate? And then, is the project a residential project? Keeping in mind that residential projects, while necessary and desirable, increase demand for public services, and they do not provide any really offsetting revenue for as long as the TIF district runs. So in some cases, we may want to provide an incentive to a residential project, especially if we see it as a game changer, like Uptown 500 or something like that. But maybe in other cases you don't, because it's not a game changer. And again, would the project be built without an incentive? I think it's important to realize that when you create a TIF district, you also create an incentive for developers to ask for TIF money, because there's no downside to doing so. They may have to pay a financial advisor a few $1,000s to put their TIF request together for them. But in terms of the potential that they could get back in TIF money, it costs almost nothing to do that. So it's, if you build it, they will come and they will ask for money. That's really, if it's there, they're going to ask for it. And then if the answer to the TIF incentive question is yes, we do want to provide a TIF incentive, then I think it's important to ask, are we paying for extraordinary costs, stormwater mitigation, environmental contamination, infrastructure, and so forth, or is the incentive just intended to increase the developer's profit? And what percentage of the increment are we willing to offer? We've generally tried to stay away from offering all of the increment that the project generates, and typically it's a small percentage of the increment, again, so that we can capture that money for our own taxpayers. And then how soon can we pay off the incentive so that we can declare surpluses? I think are things that are important to ask yourself.
We'll put all of those into a memo so that you have them for reference for future use. If you'd like them, at least we'll make them available.
Okay. And it's time for our next question. And here we go. So the question number 9 of 11 is, what did the village do after implementing a 0.25% home rule sales tax rate in 1994? few seconds left. Okay. We lost people.
Yeah.
iPads went
It
down.
went down? Oh, no.
Mine's still good. Mine too.
Oh, no. Well, that gives certain people a decided advantage. Yeah,
You can cash the check now, Michael?
right. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, and then the second key topic is pension funding, and we are almost done here. So I just wanted to show the board that compared to neighboring communities, the village's pension funds, and this is just police and fire, are really at the average in terms of how well-funded they are. So 60%. You can see there's some communities that are significantly less than that and some that are more, but we are at the average. And this is based on Illinois Department of Insurance actuarial reports, so it's apples to apples. As a point of comparison, Harvey, which has been in the news a lot lately, their pension funds are only 34% funded. And this is our unfunded liabilities, how much we owe the pension funds to pay off the unfunded liability to 2040. And you can see that on a per capita basis, Wheeling is actually owes less than some of these other communities. Some are obviously much larger than us, so they have significant unfunded liabilities. The average is 99.9, almost $100 million. Ours is 62. Yeah, I said on a per capita basis, but this is actually millions of dollars. So we're at 62 million, and the total is 962 million for all of these communities. And this is on a per capita basis. You can see that we're lower than a lot of our neighbors in terms of what we owe our pension funds. The average being $2,169 per person. So the question is, what can we do to make sure that our pension funds, especially police and fire, are better funded? And the recommendation that we made in the budget letter was to lower the investment return assumption, which currently for police and fire is 7.5%. That's what we have told the actuaries that we think we can earn on our future investments. And that's high compared to our neighbors. And the effect of having a high investment return assumption is lower annual employer contributions. I wanted to show you the investment returns, average investment returns for police and fire pension funds for the last few years. And you can see that for Wheeling, the average is 6.31% for fire, and surprisingly, it's basically the same for police, even though they've had different investment managers. They've had basically the same result. IMRF has earned 7.45%, and you can see what these other communities have done. The reason this is important is because if we're assuming that we're going to earn 7.5%, but in reality we're only earning 6.3%, then that assumption is a bad assumption, and it needs to be adjusted so that we can make sure that our pension funds are well funded going forward.
I know we don't control police and fire pensions and how they're invested, but when you see that big of a difference between IMRF and police and fire, how do we fix that? How do we make it so police and fire are up there with IMRF?
Well, I don't know that we'll ever be able to achieve the results that IMRF achieves because they have much more flexibility in terms of how they can invest their assets than the police and fire pension funds do. Police and fire are controlled, they're limited by state statute to essentially putting 55% of their assets in equities and 45%, 55 or 60, and 45 or 40% in fixed income. And when you're required to invest that much money in fixed income, bonds and that type of thing, it's very difficult to achieve a higher rate of return. And so IMRF has more flexibility because they they have built into state statute options that our pension funds don't have. So what we can do is, we can certainly monitor the progress that our investment managers are making, compare and benchmark that against our neighbors, and try to select the best investment managers. And we can increase the amount of money that we invest in equities, which is something that the Fire Pension Fund recently did. They increased the amount that they allocate in stocks from 55% to 60%. And that should, over time, maybe not in the short term, but over time, it should lift our return.
And you mentioned that when we lower the investment return assumption, it costs us more because we're not expecting to get as much on that investment.
Right.
Approximately how much more? Do we know by
We
if it's
do.
a quarter
So,
percent?
and I have a slide for that too. But
Sorry.
But the answer is every 0.25% is $385,000 of additional employer contributions to the fund. And that's a lot of money, and it comes from the property tax levy. So it's a balancing act to try to put more money into the pension funds without burdening the taxpayers too much. And that's what we've been struggling with for years. So I'll have one other thing to say about that. In terms of investment return assumptions, though, this is comparing Wheeling to our neighbors, and you can see that 7.5% is high. The average, not including Wheeling, is 6.9%. But there are a couple communities, Winnetka and Evanston, that are as low as 6.25%, which is probably right. And in fact, since we've been earning 6.3% for the last 10 years, it seems very right to me. Okay, back to Kahoot. Oh, I guess there's only 3 players now, right? Or can you sign back in? We'll try it. Question was, what was housed at Pewaukee Airport in 1933 and 1934?
Oh, I know the answer. My thing's not working.
There's only 2 people.
Farm implement dealer.
All right, the answer is the Goodyear blimp, and 2 of the 3 people who are playing actually got that right. So,
And why?
Everybody call Mike.
Why?
on their
Why was it there?
blow it up.
do you know the answer?
Yes,
Okay,
World's
What-
Fair.
okay. I did not know that. All right, so karate, commanding lead. The fix is in.
Sure. I won't share.
No, I don't.
Okay,
This will cost you, Michael.
yeah.
Can't do it on
Okay. So the question that always comes up is, how well-funded do we have to be? And the state of Illinois says 90% by 2040, and others believe 100%. But Brian and I actually attended a seminar about a year ago, and there was a presenter there, and his name is Tom Seguros, and he works for an organization called the Haas Institute, and he's a researcher, and he did a paper on this issue of how well-funded does a pension fund really need to be.
Before you hit the next slide, just, so this topic, pensions, right? We talk about how much of the budget goes to salaries and, expenses related to employees, and how much of that number is dedicated to pensions. And it should be, obviously, we understand that. But the rule of 90% funded by 2040 is something that has been debated among managers and finance directors for a long time. Because why? Why do you need to be 90% funded when the only reason you would need 90 or 100% funded is if we went out of business, right? It's the only time that you would have to pay out the full value of the pension at any given time. So Michael has a lot more to say, but The next slide is, it is the next slide, right?
I think so.
Okay, good. The next slide is one of the most impactful things that I think I've ever seen when it comes to discussing pension liability and why the rule that we, collectively we, not the Village of Wheeling, all of us in Illinois have to follow makes really no sense.
Yeah, and it might not be the next slide, but maybe the slide after.
Well, now it has to be the next slide because I really built that up.
Yeah, you did. So just to give you a quick background of the history of pensions.
We're building tension. That's
We
what we're
are.
trying to do.
Government pensions go back all the way to the, age of the Continental Army and George Washington, who actually prevented a mutiny over a pension issue. Massachusetts was the first state in 1911 to offer pensions to their employees, but by the 1930s, many governments were doing this on a pay-as-you-go basis, and we've talked a lot about pay-as-you-go today. Social Security is pay-as-you-go and has actually never missed a payment. But what happened was that there was a fear that at some point escalating pension payments were going to create a situation where governments were no longer able to fund their pensions, and so that led to actuarial funding. And in 1994, GASB issued statements 25 and 27, which required that you include actuarial data in your financial statements and discouraged pay-as-you-go funding. So now you had to determine, hiring an actuary, what the annual required contribution was to the fund. And the long-term effect of that change in accounting standards was to suggest that the nation has a pension funding crisis. And there are articles all the time nowadays in the newspapers and on the internet about the pension funding crisis that our country is dealing with. And the reason that there was a unfunded liability is because since they were paying on a pay-as-you-go basis, they were of course they were not 100% funded when they had to start doing that. So again, the question is, do we need to be 100% funded or even 90%? And as the village manager indicated, the accounting rules assume that government is the same as the private sector and that we will someday go out of business, and therefore we need to be really 100% funded. And so, an example would be the private sector versus government pensions. If we allow for the possibility that there might be a company called Spondylis Incorporated, and that they manufacture telephone booths and typewriters and fax machines and 8-track tapes. And they have 100 full-time employees who earn pension funds. And we assume that the Spondylis pension fund is 65% funded. The question becomes, should the employees worry? And the answer is they should absolutely worry, because this is a terrible business plan.
No offense.
No offense to the manager. But these products are not there's not going to be any demand for these products going forward, and this business is going to go out of business. And when that happens, if they're only 65% funded, those employees are going to be in a lot of trouble, and the retirees as well. But what about the city or the village's pension funds? And the question is, should those employees worry if the pension fund is not 100% funded? And Seguros, in his paper that he wrote, which I can provide to anyone who's interested in reading it, says no, because the accounting rules don't allow you to count future contributions from future employees or the employer. They're only looking at your pension fund at a point in time. How much money do you have in the pension fund today to pay out pension benefits if the village were to go out of business? You don't get to consider the fact that there's always going to be Wheeling employees, police officers and firefighters and so forth paying into the pension fund and an employer that does the same. So most people have been led to believe that unless you're 100% funded, you're going to run out of money. But Seguros argues that that's not in fact true, because you can continue to pay your pension debt, your pension benefits, for years and years with much less than 100% funding. And this is what the manager was referring to before, is this model that he created that I want to show you. And what this is, let's see if I can get it all the way on the screen. It's a piggy bank, obviously. And it's showing at the top here, these are the younger employees who are just starting out. And then as you move to the right, you have people who are starting to retire, and then eventually they pass away, they die off. And what it shows is that the red circles are the contributions being made to the pension fund. So this is employer and employee contributions. And the orange circles are investment returns, the money that's being earned on the assets. The blue circles that are going out of the piggy bank are pension payments being made to retirees. And what he shows, oh, and by the way, this is based on a model based on the California State Teachers Retirement System, which is one of the largest pension funds in the United States. They have $1 billion worth of assets, and and thousands of participants. And what it shows is each year you have a balance. Beginning in 2013 is when this model starts. Premiums are the contributions that are coming in. Benefits are the payments that are going out. Income is the money that's earned on the investments. And then you have the balance in the pension fund at the end of the year. Full funding is what you would need to be 100% funded, but because you don't have that much money, at the end of each year you're at whatever this row indicates. So in this case, 45.8% funded. And this scenario changes every time you run it, because it's based on different assumptions about investment returns. You'll see that in some cases, the investment returns are negative because the stock market may have been down that year. But the point is that this pension fund is never close to 100% funded, and yet every year they're able to make all of their pension payments. And this goes on for forever if you allow it.
If you let it run, it will go 200 years, and I don't know how many times you've done it, but I've done it at least a dozen, and it never gets below, I think the lowest I saw it was 35%. And every time you do it, like Michael said, it's different every time because it's making different assumptions. It's trying to mimic reality, and it's never been below 35%.
Yeah, and so that was the point I was trying to demonstrate here, is based on his research. A unit of government can meet the commitments that it has made to its employees for many, many years at much less than 100% funding.
And this is out of Berkeley,
Yeah.
sort of socially aware.
Kind of similar to Affordable Care Act.
Okay, so.
That was polite,
And then finally, he makes an argument that in some ways, it's actually a negative to be 100% funded, because assuming that you're not going to need the money for many years to come, you could be using that to pay for infrastructure projects or additional employees if you need them or whatever. And so there's an opportunity cost to being 100% funded. And also, I guess you might not need to tax as much if you decide that you don't need to be 100% funded at any given time. But the target is still 90% by 2040, because that's what the state of Illinois has told us that we have to be funded. So staff recommends lowering the investment return. The impact is $385,000 next year and in future years. And the effect of that is it will increase our unfunded liabilities, because now we're going to assume we're earning less on our investments. And it will decrease our funded percentage. So next year, if we're having the same conversation, those numbers may actually go down, which could cause some alarm. But in reality, our pension funds will be better funded. And the best example I can give of how this works is if you are saving for a car, and actually we do this is exactly how our SURF fund works. So in this case, it just so happens that President Horker and I have decided that we need to buy a new car in 5 years. And we've decided that we're going to take money out of our paycheck every month and set that aside, just like we do in our SURF funds, so that we have the money that we need in 5 years without having to borrow for it and pay whatever the interest costs on car loans are at that time. So we've decided the car is going to cost $30,000, and we have 5 years to save the money we need. And the only difference between President Horker and myself is that President Horker is very conservative, and he has decided that he is only going to earn 2% on the money that he invests towards this goal, because he's going to put it in a savings account, and that's as much risk as he's willing to take. On the other hand, everyone knows that I am a risk taker, that I am willing to, go way out there and take on an incredible amounts of risk. And so I have decided that I'm going to invest.
I thought you were going to say that's all I could figure out to earn.
And we've decided that I can earn 15% on the money that I'm putting into my savings account. And the way I'm going to achieve that is I'm going to invest all the money in Svandilis Incorporated. I have this friend, his name is John, and he has this great company that makes great products. And he has told me not to worry. I can earn 15% a year by investing in his business, and his pension fund is very well funded, so I'm confident that this is not going to be a problem. He actually said he's killing it. So the difference is that President Horker is going to have to put in $476 a month because he's only earning 2% on his investment. I only have to put in $339 a month because I'm earning a 15% return. The point of this exercise is just to show that if you lower the investment return assumption, you have to put more money in to get to the same goal. And so after 5 years, we'll end up at about the same place. But President Horker will have contributed $28,000 of his own money, and I will only have put in $20,000 of my money, because the vast majority of my contribution or my savings will come from interest earnings or investment returns.
But that, of course, is assuming that 15% is going to be fruitful.
That's right, but I am confident that that is not going to be a problem. Now, if it turns out that my friend John has not told the truth, then President Horker is going to be driving a new car, and I'm going to be driving a 1983 Delta Oldsmobile 88, So anyway, lower rate of return equals more money. Okay, should we even bother at this point if no one's playing?
I got booted.
Well, it seems they want to play.
Yeah. Okay. Whoops. Here we go. Okay. Here's the next question, and it's the last question. What does the A stand for in John Svandilis' name?
Mike is the only one who's playing it.
Only one player.
Can I ask your dad a question?
Yes, you can use my father as reference if you'd like.
This be one of the ones where you shouldn't use the picture as a guide.
Yeah, right.
He's very ahead of the time.
All right, well,
Starts with an A.
the answer is Angelo. There were two people that got that right, so. Well, Crotty, unfortunately, is the winner.
So you get to, Mike now gets to come up and ask all the hard questions of the board.
Right.
Take the leftover
And
donuts.
so when we get to the end here, I
Take
will
the
hand
leftover
out
donuts home.
prizes, although it pains me to have to give a prize to Mike. All right. Okay, and then the final item for today is, I just wanted to talk about tax rates. In years past, I've talked about tax burden, and I gave an example of an imaginary town where if a business goes out of business, the tax burden shifts from the businesses to the existing taxpayers. This year, I wanted to talk about tax rates and how one community's tax rate can actually be lower than another community's tax rate, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that community is better managed than the other one. So quickly here we have Crotty Land versus Mondopolis are two communities that are identical in almost every respect. They have 4 homes and 2 businesses, and they provide the exact same services with the exact same number of employees. The only difference being that Crotty Land's annual budget is $150,000, whereas Mondopolis's annual budget is $100,000 because Mondopolis is much better managed than Crotty Land, as you would expect. And the assumptions we've made here is that the only source of revenue is property taxes. There's no other taxing districts, and everybody is a White Sox fan, which we know to be the case. And the difference here is that in Crotty Land, the homes are valued. They have property values that are exactly twice that of Mondopolis. So they have $8 million of total EAV compared to Mondopolis, which only has $4 million. And so if we assume that they are assessed at 10% for simplicity purposes, then their EAV is $800,000 in Crotty Land, and their tax levy is $150,000. So the tax rate that creates is 0.1875. On the other side, Mondopolis only has a market value of $4 million, an EAV of $400,000, and a tax levy of $50,000 less. But because of the way the math works, the formula, they have a tax rate that is 33% higher than Crotty Land. And so the question is, what does that prove? Well, it proves that a village's tax rate is directly related to the value of its property, and to a much lesser extent, its tax levy. Wealthier communities with more property wealth have lower tax rates, generally speaking. But if a village's tax rate is lower than another's, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's better managed, because as we saw, Mondopolis has a higher tax rate than Crotty Land, but provides the same services at a cost that's 33% less. So again, villages that have more property wealth tend to have lower property tax rates, and villages with less property wealth have higher property tax rates just because of the way the math works. And here's a real-world example using the 2017 tax year. Wheeling had a tax levy, including loss and costs, of almost $16 million. Our EAV was $956 million. That produced a tax rate of 1.66. Mount Prospect had a higher tax levy, but because they have a higher EAV, their tax rate was less. Same was true of Arlington Heights. More wealth equals a lower tax rate. And I threw in here an example again of Harvey, which has a tax levy that is similar to Wheeling's in terms of the amount of dollars they're collecting. But because they have about 20% of the wealth that Wheeling has, their tax rate is 8.868, which is astronomical. And so, you'll often see, and I would not say that our president would ever do this, but you will often see in the newspaper presidents and mayors like to brag about their tax rates, but I would say that a community's tax rate is not a good indicator of how well it's managed. In fact, there's other benchmarks, factors like total property taxes collected general fund revenue and expenditures, sales tax collections, and number of employees, I think are better benchmarks than tax rate. And in years past, we've shown you how we compare to other communities. And you can see that our tax levy is relatively low compared to other communities. And where some communities like Niles or Glenview have lower property tax levies, it's generally because they bring in much more sales tax revenue than we do. And in fact, here's sales tax by community. And what you'll see is because we collect, such a low amount of sales tax relative to our comparable communities, we necessarily have to have a slightly higher tax levy. These communities benefit from the sales tax revenue that they're collecting. And then this is municipal sales tax, the 1%, not including home rule, so it's apples to apples, income and property tax, the big three by community. And what I think this demonstrates is that although some of these communities are larger than Wheeling, many are similar in size, and yet we are providing the same services at really a lower cost than a lot of these other towns.
Michael, so lately all the housing developments we're adding is bringing a balance to our demographics, a higher demographic in Wheeling, and it's overall balancing everything out much better as opposed to the out of balance it was. And higher demographics tend to increase visibility for retailers.
Right.
They would locate in a place where the demographics are conducive to where they'd get customers. So do we, with that change or that balance that we have with our demographics, do you see even more retailers wanting to come here because of that?
I think so, and I think that the town center is a perfect example of that.
Can I clarify something? You specifically said retailers, and I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing, because even town center, there is very little retail. So are you asking specifically about sales tax?
Sales tax.
And new businesses that are selling goods coming to town? I mean, I think Director Malanaphy can probably talk about the climate of retail in this day and age, because I think I would say...
Retail that's not a good example anymore because retail has changed so much.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that that's
So
the point.
I threw out retail, but I mean actually tax
But
producing.
I think your point is correct, that as we build more developments, we create more demand for retail. That's why you end up with a town center project, because they feel like they can make money here. Right?
And we're competing against other communities. Not, we're making things nice for the folks in Wheeling, of course, and creating more amenities. But if we didn't do it, someone else would. So we've been very fortunate to be able to have this growth when other communities haven't really done it. And we're directly competing with Buffalo Grove, Arlington Heights, Prospect Heights, Mount Prospect, and so on. When it comes to developments, they could easily have gone to some of those other locations, but we got them.
Right.
And we're taking advantage of that.
And I think there's communities around here that are jealous of what Wheeling has been able.
It was in the paper yesterday with Buffalo Grove. It was very flattering to hear.
Right. So it's all good news. If you compare general fund revenues, it's the same story. We're providing essentially the same services with less money than our neighbors. And same thing applies to expenditures. We're spending less. And so I think all of these things are better measures of efficiency and effectiveness and how well a town is managed than tax rate. And when you compare the big three departments, police, fire, and public works, you can see that, we have fewer employees than these other communities. So that is finally it. I know everybody's anxious for me to be done. The next part of the workshop is to answer questions about revenue that I mentioned earlier and to try to get some consensus and then talk about expanded level sheets and then adjourn and have lunch. So I guess I have prizes to hand out as much as this. I don't know.
Why don't we do that at the end?
You want to do that
Just
at the
to-
end?
Yeah,
Okay.
just to
All right, we'll do that.
keep the momentum here.
Mr. Smondelis, next is tax levy discussion?
Yeah, do you have slides, or are we talking?
I don't. The three issues are just the 3.5%, and then the idea of an amusement tax and a health inspection fee.
So we want to move forward. We want to make sure that we're moving forward correctly. So as Director Monshane said, the yes or no question moving forward is the 3.5% levy. The question we would like direction on is, would you like staff to do the research and bring to you an opportunity for an amusement tax? And we kind of talked about the amusement tax, what that means. In our conversations, while, of course, we have, as Attorney Furlow said, we have the opportunity to craft that tax. The way we see it, the only thing it would affect, if I recall correctly, is movie sales, or our movie sales. And then the third thing, which we only touched on, is we are one of the only communities that do not charge restaurants in the three categories of risk, low, medium, and high for their health inspections. Depending on their risk level, which is basically what kind of restaurant they are. Seafood, of course, is one of the highest because it has the most risk. There is a graduated scale of what other municipalities charge restaurants for these inspections. And of course, that would go directly to offset the cost of a health inspector. We are one of the only communities, as I said, that does not have such a fee. And the general question is, would you like us to pursue that? That meaning doing the research and bringing to you a full package of, here's the explanation, here's the suggestion, would you like to implement it? This is only, is this a good idea for us to look into question? So one specific question and then two general questions for direction to staff.
I'll do one at a time.
Please.
Looking for, this is just a consensus.
Correct. Oh yeah, this is not a vote, this is consensus so that staff knows how to move forward.
I'm going to hang on the tax levy. I'd like to jump to the entertainment tax. And the question is, do we want staff to do the research on an entertainment tax?
And yes, correct.
Trustee Brady?
We have been waiting for a theater for over 30 years, probably closer to 40 years. We finally get one to come in, now we're going to slap them with taxes. I'd say let them get going first. I don't want to punish the company that comes in first. I don't see any real benefit of it either. If we're going to get sales tax out of it, plenty of sales tax out of the goods they sell in there and the liquor that they're going to sell. I don't think we need that nickel or quarter a head.
He's a no.
No? Okay.
Trustee Kruger?
Yes.
Trustee Lang?
Just a quick question. There's no state or county tax that could be implemented to that as well, is there?
In addition, no.
Okay, so strictly us, home rule.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I'd say no at this time. I would love to, but I would just say, I think Trustee Brady makes a great point.
Thank you. Trustee Vito?
As this is just looking into it, I'd like to at least look into it and see what the data is before.
That's all
say
this is.
No. So, yeah, I mean, I might very well be with Trustee Lang and Trustee Brady at the end of it, but I'd like to see what it is first.
Trustee Papantos?
Yes.
Trustee Vogel?
Yes, I'd like to see what it's about, too.
I'm also a yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Health inspection fee, do we want staff to do the research on this? I'm going to start on my left. Trustee Vogel,
Yes.
trustee Papantos,
Yes.
trustee Vito.
Yes, for the same reasons I'll look into.
Thank you. Trustee Lang,
Same, yes.
trustee Kruger,
Yes.
trustee Brady.
No,
I am a yes.
Okay.
Thank you, trustee Brady. Clarification on the tax question, Mr. Spondilis. What are we looking strictly at considering the 3.5 or?
Yeah, of course, the discussion can happen to any level the board would like to see it, but that is staff's recommendation.
Let's have a discussion on the 3.5. Does anybody have any questions or proposals for different rates? To my right,
okay with me.
just discussion, to my left. What do you
I think based on his 5-year projection, I think we have to go with the 3.5.
Okay, well, I would like to go for a consensus then. Trustee Lang,
Yes.
trustee Vito,
Yes.
trustee Kruger,
Yes.
trustee Papantos,
Yes.
trustee Brady,
Yes,
trustee Vogel.
Yes.
I'm also a yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Then what we can do is go one by one through the expanded level sheets, which begin on page 199 in your draft budget. Again, the white, and we'll provide an explanation for each one of them. Generally, though, white sheets, and you'll see my signature on it, mean that I'm recommending them. Pink sheets mean that I didn't. That doesn't mean they're bad ideas. It simply means that in the balance of the larger picture, not at this time. So beginning on page 199, what we have is a $50,000 suggestion for next year is the village's 125th anniversary. There is a citizen group that is looking at a number of activities. The village is participating, the school districts are participating, as is the park district and the library. This number, quite honestly, is a guess. It could be significantly less. I don't think it will be more. In fact, some of this may be funds coming back in if we decide, say, to and you've heard me say this in the past, we don't sell T-shirts, but in this case, we may want to sell a T-shirt. We would be getting some money back. This is money allocated in the budget in order for us to sign contracts for entertainment, for commodity purchases, for whatever items we may want to have made to commemorate the 125th. Whatever it may be, that's what this is. This is a general fund in the general fund for the 125th celebration. There is a correction. It is listed as an economic well, I guess it's still economic development. Michael, it was the account number, right? This is listed as being within the admin economic development budget. This should be in special events. So just a point of note, that's where you will see this. You will see this listed in the special events budget.
Do we have questions from the board?
I have one question. Is there a way to put a cap on this? I mean, the 50,000 sounds reasonable. If it climbs to 100,000.
Well, I can't go over it without you saying, so even if you say yes to 50,000, I wouldn't go over it without coming back to you saying this is why and do you agree? And of course, it would follow all the same rules of purchasing that we have. I couldn't sign anything on my own unless it was under $20,000. So I will come back to you if we are going to exceed $50,000.
Okay.
John, we're agreeing to 50,000. What if the donations come in that'll put the budget, could that increase the budget?
We're not asking for donations.
Well, that's what it says in here. Something about a portion of these costs are expected to be recoupable through merchandise sales and donations.
Donations
From community organizations.
from community organizations, that's what that is meant to say. Okay. Meaning, there is an event planned at the Park District, they're not charging us for use of, and perhaps that should have been clear, but that's what that's intended.
Okay.
Any other questions or concerns?
You got anything in mind for this specifically? Besides like
Yes.
T-shirts, or you don't want to get into it now?
It's a little premature, but there's actually a lot already in motion for this. It is a year-long thing. There are a number of independent activities that we're looking at, along with trying to incorporate the anniversary into existing activities. So much more to come. Remember, this doesn't happen calendar year. So our anniversary is June 29th,
24th.
24th? 24th?
23rd.
Okay, you're the clerk. 24th. So it would run June 24th of 19 through June 23rd of 2020. So you'll hear a lot about this in the first half of next year.
Other questions or comments? Need a vote, probably a motion?
No, well, there's no
part of the
voting.
budget.
No, there's no voting,
already
right.
part,
And so,
yeah.
I mean, unless anyone's disagreeing, we could just move on?
Consensus looks like yes.
The second item is in the Administration Economic Development Department budget. I'll take this as opposed to handing it off to John. This is an initiative that I had and asked Economic Development to look into. And what this is specifically is bringing in a consultant to look at Restaurant Row. One of my concerns is that the history of our town has a significant basis on quote-unquote Restaurant Row. And we are known for Restaurant Row. And what this is meant to do is help us protect it. As other towns increase their economic development and bring in restaurants and other activities to attract customers to their community, there's competition for Restaurant Row. And before we lose the designation and the local reputation of Restaurant Row, I want to see what we can do to protect it. Are there incentives? Are there programs that we can create to help incentivize restaurants opening on Restaurant Row? Is there another opportunity for Riverwalk along Restaurant Row, now that there's some land that we own, and this is decades in the making, right? The village board has been very assertive in taking the opportunity to buy parcels of land to clean up Milwaukee Avenue, and that's a good thing. On the other side of it, we've lost some of the anchors that were known as Restaurant Row. La France, Hackney's, Don Roth's, it's a long list. Now, on the other hand, we do have Boston Fish Market has come in, Superdog has come in, Bob Chin's is still here, Tuscany. That list is still strong. This is my thought at just making sure that we continue to have the reputation of being Restaurant Row and make sure that the public understands it. Does that mean special signage when you enter it and when you exit it and when you leave it? I don't know. This is just meant to help us wrap our brains around defining the asset of what Restaurant Row is, and then figuring out a way to help protect it. That's the idea of this expenditure. And I'll try to answer questions as much as I can.
Questions? Trustee Kruger?
With this, Restaurant Row was deemed the name of the area by whom, and is it, I don't want to say patented, but I don't know what the right word is, but what's branded?
Trademarked.
Is it a trademark? Or has it
No, there's a website, and this is kind of my concern. Before someone north, south, east, west can decide, hey, we have more restaurants per capita than you do, this is my attempt to try and protect that. So no, it is not trademarked. We try to make sure that we use the term in association with the Village of Wheeling as much as possible, so that it's just ingrained in people that Wheeling is Restaurant Row. And in fact, that's been a chamber initiative for some time. Wheeling is Restaurant Row.
So could this consulting arrangement determine that it can be trademarked and that we would?
Somebody probably.
It's pretty common
Right.
terminology. We'd have to look into it, but
It's a great question that we will get an answer to.
Part of the protection, that's all.
Trustee Lang, did you have something?
Wheeling's Restaurant Row, right.
that could be. We'll look into it.
Did you have, Trustee Lang? No? Trustee Vito?
So where does that 18 come from? It's kind of a weird number.
We shopped quotes. Director Malanaphy went to a number of agencies, and we have an actual proposal that's $18,000.
All right. John, you're on board with that? Oh, all right. Just making sure, because I mean, I hate paying consultants when we have John, Mary Anthony, and they can work with the Convention and Visitors Bureau. Mallory can look up a trademark, I'm sure. I mean, she does all sorts of stuff I have no idea about.
This is much more broad. This isn't about attracting business as much as it is a marketing plan. That's
Right.
why, I agree with you. That's why this isn't really an assignment for ED.
All right.
Anything else? Consensus of the board is yes or no?
We didn't.
Brady, Kruger, yes. Lang, yes. Vito?
Yes.
I got Vogel, yes. Mary is texting. Yes.
Thank you. The next item, page 201, is $14,500 for a village marketing community intro video. Generally, it is exactly that. The question that I had when it was brought to me, and the reason I didn't sign it, was simply trying to understand the value for the dollars. That's all. Who's your customer base? Who are you trying to attract? Is there value in spending this much money for a professional video? Obviously, it's a good thing. When we've had delegations from Korea come to us, they played these extravagant, almost Hollywood quality videos about their communities. And that's great. There's a lot of wow factor in that. I just wasn't sure that necessarily that was something that we needed. A number of these requests are certainly debatable. There are lots of communities that advertise on the radio, as we do, but there are a lot of communities that advertise on television, at Bulls games. Some communities in our area bought football games in the Bahamas. And that's fine. They see value in that. All of these things kind of relate to simply how much we want to get out of there and how much can we define as return on our investment. John, did I do that justice?
We just, we want to look at all the different resources that might be out there, but obviously we have a finite budget, and so we just wanted to throw these things out to have them be considered. You mentioned TV and radio. I mean, there's communities that do a lot of radio advertising or TV, but it's very expensive, and what's the return on that investment? I mean, we do have a village video on our website. It's very well done, but, you know, we just wanted the board to look at these things and have the opportunity to vote on them.
And I'm not saying this is a bad idea. I didn't sign it. Certainly, it's up to the board.
Trustee Brady.
Do we still have a welcome package for new residents?
Yes.
We do?
Yes.
What does that contain?
It's a folder full of all kinds of information on local businesses.
It's less than a year old. It was actually completed before Drew left, which is just a year the other day. So, and I can give you copies of it.
Is everybody that new in town get one?
Yes.
So I was going to say, this would be another avenue of doing the same thing, putting it on a video, which we probably already have, and then put a little folder in there for people to watch Channel 99, and they'll get to see everything about their new village. It's a big investment, but then how many people will get the benefit of it? I don't know.
The other thing we looked at is how many people actually watch the video on our website, and it's very low, to be honest with you. So that was, some of those videos aren't watched generally very often.
So, what is he, yes or no?
I don't know. Any other comments? Capentos, Vito,
No.
Vogel?
No.
Anyone interested in saying yes to this? Don't all jump at once. Looks like a no.
Okay, no.
Page 202, village marketing, social media, and blog outreach. Again, the description says a lot about what this is. My mindset is the same as the previous discussion.
John, would you like to maybe elaborate a little bit on the specifics?
Again, economic development, just looking at additional resources, other things we could be doing, some things that other communities have done. The success of those campaigns, is debatable. A lot of this isn't measurable. It's very difficult to see if a social media blog really impacted our sales, but these are some of the things that other communities are doing, but it comes at a cost. So we just wanted the board to be aware of them. It's probably, we're doing a lot of other things that I think are providing benefits. This one was just one we wanted to be aware of, but I would probably say we're spending money in better ways with some of the other initiatives that we've implemented.
So the recommendation is no. Does anybody have a question or other opinion? Looks like no. Next.
Third and final in the series of similar type requests. This is Xfinity TV advertising for television and cable station ads. I don't know that there's much to add. This is just a different avenue of doing the same thing.
Questions or comments from the board? Change the decision for a no.
I'm just wondering, so John, are you advocating for these? Because you're kind of like not pushing for them, so I'm wondering like why they're here.
Well, they're here because if we had an unlimited budget, we would do
Okay,
these.
all right,
I
all
mean,
right.
but certainly we have to work within the realm of our budget.
Right.
And so if our budget was unlimited, I would vote to go ahead with all these.
Okay,
But
okay.
we have finite resources and we have to use them very judiciously.
Fair
So
enough.
I just want the board to know that we're looking at a variety of new ways to get our message out, but some of them are very expensive.
And Trustee Vito, that's a great point. Everything that's in here that's a pink sheet is a good idea. If it wasn't, I simply wouldn't have included it for your review. So these all passed that test with me. It was just a matter of, I don't want to be, this is a policy decision, how far out the village, the board wants to go with its exposure and its media campaign. So these are all, whether it's these particular issues or any of the other pink sheets, they're all good ideas. It's just a matter of prioritizing against our bottom line. So thank you for bringing that up, because I don't want to dismiss any of these. These are all great ideas.
Can I pose an idea that I shared with you, John and Michael, when we met regarding budget? I know that these are for professional agencies to develop video and blogging and, Xfinity advertising, but I guess I can tout my kid who, went to college in the media environment and world, and he got his start at Wheeling High School, and their media department was very robust. Just an idea to, like spaghetti, like these seem to be, to see if it sticks, but reach out to the school and see if there aren't, a programming or a curriculum that they could do for a quarter or a semester and do this for us and get something out of it. So
Along those lines, Mary, we actually did that at the chamber, and we hired a Wheeling High School intern, and she's completely run circles around our antiquated social media
beautiful.
for that.
That's what I'm saying. I mean,
she's
their
really good.
ideas and their abilities based on the curriculum that's already there at the school could be an avenue of support for us. That's it.
Page 204, 911 screen recorder. Well, again, the description is self-evident, but Chief, would you like to give some additional detail?
This is a software program that allows us to capture the screen in time so we can go back and point out deficiencies in the systems, provide rewards for how we handled systems, and just be able to help us move forward a little bit better with dealing with our personnel when issues arise.
And with that description, I had a hard time saying, no, it didn't hurt that the total expenditure is $4,400. Between the two of us, we could probably answer any other questions. And Raquel is here.
Silly question. Or someone already asking?
No, you.
Okay, I realize this probably comes some kind of a software feature that would be added to our existing 911 software?
Correct.
Okay, so sometimes I have a screen capture ability at work that I can capture a screen and email that to somebody. But if I didn't have that, I would use my phone, my cell phone, and take a picture of that screen and use that for whatever I needed to. Why is that? I know it's only $4,400, but I'm just curious why other technology isn't an option.
This is more like a recording.
Mike?
Rick Keller, can you just come to the mic? Thank you.
Sorry, my 911 voice usually projects. This is more like a recording of what's happening in real time, not unlike we would record a 911 telephone call.
Got it.
You know, when you're dealing with such complex software as the CAD system, the phone system, a telephone recording system, you need to have real-time recording what's happening as far as when the TC is typing into the screen, transmitting on the radio.
So
You
it's
need a
more than just
360
a
view.
single still screenshot?
No.
It is a sort of a screen capture of an event?
Yeah, and I think it's every 3 to 5 seconds.
Okay,
And it streams together like a video.
thank you, that helped.
What's actually on the screen? What are we recording? Like
You're
words that are said?
recording the 911 screen?
I've never been in a 911 center, so I
Well,
don't know
you
what's
should
on
come
the...
visit us. I
what's
think
on-
it's fantastic.
What's actually on the screen? What's coming up?
It's what comes over from the telephone call. So you'll have your address, telephone number, depending on whether it's a landline or a wireless line or a VoIP or text to 911. That information is how it's populated, auto-populated. You'll also get live screen of what the telecommunicator is typing in as they're listening to the telephone call to make sure that that information is being put in correctly. There's lots of choices. Again, it's a fairly complex system. Anytime there is a dispatch and you see an officer being dispatched to the call, that all that information will be recorded real time.
Okay.
Being that this is only $4,400, why is this even part of our budget? I mean, it seems like such a small amount
It's-
that it's a no-brainer to me.
It didn't have to be, but the chief and went through all the effort of writing it up.
And when can we schedule tours?
Anytime you want.
Thank you.
We're open 24/7.
I thought so.
Exactly.
So this has been scheduled for approval. This is good with everybody?
Yes.
Okay. Just for my own benefit here, I missed, we had a brief discussion just a few moments ago about an intern or a high school student or program. Is there interest in at least having Mr. Svandelis look into what's going on at the chamber with their program on that, or maybe next year?
Well, I mean, it's simple. I mean, we just hired an intern from Wheeling to help us with our social media, and she's been great.
Did you have to
that was
hire
the
him?
gist of it. She helps out around the office and was able to get us on Instagram and,
Did you have to hire them, though? I mean,
Yeah,
pay them as a
we
job. I mean,
hired
is
them.
that-
And I just
Yeah.
want to be clear, we're now talking about two very different things.
right.
So we handle our social media, staff
Okay.
handles
Right.
social media. So this is about a video, which Trustee Kruger, as she said, we discussed, and we can absolutely do. I wouldn't debate
Sorry.
that for a second. I think that's an excellent idea. I would simply say that there is a difference. Everyone should have a different expectation about what the value of the company doing it at $18,000 or whatever the amount was versus the high school. But it goes back to the argument about, well, who's your audience? Doesn't matter. I'm sure that the high school can do an excellent job, and there is certainly value in bringing in a local student to
Absolutely.
help promote their municipality. So I don't think there's a downside to it.
And if it's taken on as part of their curriculum for that quarter, you know, the media department says, hey, we have got a task to help our community. We're going to create a promotional video. Are we paying them? No. I mean,
And we're doing that. We're doing that again with the photography group to rerun the program that we started several years ago
Same thing.
for Village Hall.
Okay.
So yes,
Okay, I'm sorry, I just wasn't quite sure. It just sort of drifted off, and I wasn't
Sure.
clear. All right, okay.
Page 205, the fire department has asked for 2 additional part-time fire inspectors, and I'll let the chief detail this. But as you see I approved one of the two, so you'll see my handwriting here, and I'm sure the chief, again, will give more detail, but the issue here is with all the new development happening in town, our focus is on plan review. Our focus is on making sure that those developments are happening appropriately, and from our end, happening as quickly as we could turn them around. However, when your focus is there, it shifts away from our ability to do routine inspections, and that is a significant safety concern, meaning getting into buildings and making sure that they are safe and up to code. The balance of the new versus old, the amount of construction rolling off in future years, that's why I said yes to one as opposed to both of them, because I do see that balance shifting a little bit away from new construction as some of these larger projects come and go within the next 5 years. That's my thought process, but Chief, if you'd like to explain a little bit about the request in addition to what I've said, or Deputy Chief McGreal.
If I can just expand on what you brought up, is that right now we have one part-time, one full-time inspector. And the bulk of the full-time inspections is Ron Antor, who's been here for a long time and has a lot of experience. He's doing most of the new construction, plan review, any of the zoning boards he's going to. So his time is spent doing that. So we have a part-time inspector, 1,000 hours a year. And what he's doing is, if you look at the village, what the Bureau is tasked for is not only what Ron's doing with new construction, it's also getting into every occupancy in the village with the exception of single-family and townhomes. So all the municipal buildings, park districts, the airports, multifamily, all the industry and all the manufacturing, we do a life safety inspection, and industry standard is one a year. So at this time, he's basically doing what they can to get maybe a third of that done. So it's taken 2, 3, 4 years to get to about, and not to mention the re-inspections. Now, that doesn't mean the really life safety where we're identified, maybe the crews are out and they see something that, you know, that needs attention. Doors are chained shut, or there's no fire extinguisher, something like that. We address it right away with the Bureau. But also, Ron's not going to be here forever. Ron has a lot of experience with fire prevention, and so does Chief McIsaac. Chief McIsaac pitches in with the plan review, any of the consultations, and with the impending retirement of both of them, that's going to leave a void. So we have a part-time inspector who's Bob Nemec. He's going to take, we're grooming him. He's been going to classes for plan review. We're hoping he moves into the full-time position. So again, we were looking for 2 inspectors. Before the recession, we did have 3 full-time, 1 part-time. So in a sense, we're just asking for the 2 part-timers to fill it.
Trustee Brady.
Mike, what's your routine on re-inspections, going around businesses and that there to look at how they're maintaining their buildings and that?
Well, again, if we're only getting into a third of the buildings, it's pretty scarce. But if anything's identified, it depends if it's a life safety hazard, which is immediate, we go at it right away, whether we'll send a battalion chief, Chief McIsaac, myself, Ron. So those get addressed as soon as possible.
So do you do this on your own, or do you have to wait for a call?
Both. If Bob Nemec goes in is under his annual life safety inspection when he's in a building, he identifies it, he writes it up and gets it to us. Now, if we get a phone call, if we get community development that'll call us, if we get a business owner to call us, we'll address them as we can.
So you do make annual life safety inspections on businesses?
Of a small, yes, we do, but what we're getting done now is a.
So it's kind of tough with one fire marshal and one inspector.
Yes.
You think you could keep 2 guys going?
Yes, matter of fact, yes.
Would you find 2 firemen with the experiences enough to be a fire inspector part-time?
A lot of the part-time fire inspectors are fire department members from other departments. Bob Nemec's a Schaumburg firefighter, a lieutenant on his days, on his regular job, and he works here. Ron Antor was a firefighter before he was. To use our own firefighters, we were talking about that, but there's IRS implications with the 7G exemption. So we've mentioned it, but we're not quite there, to have them work on their days off for a prorated rate rather than overtime, to have them to do inspections while they're on duty, to have a crew go. If you can imagine in any of the buildings in town and how busy our people are, they'd be called out so fast, you wouldn't get any of them done, so.
Thank you. Okay.
Other questions? Approved then? Yep, 2.
I say 2.
Anyone else interested in both of them? Kruger, Lang, Vito, Santos, Vogel? Looks like 1.
That is all the expanded level, and I believe Mike has exhausted all of his slides. Mike, is there anything in conclusion that you wanted to add?
No, but I want to hand out prizes.
Awards?
Yeah.
Awards. We have the awards.
It's true.
Sorry to be the guy with one last question.
Trustee
but
Vito.
I have one last question, Mike. If the pension issue and the funding, the percentage of funding isn't that big of a deal per the piggy bank slide, why why lower the rate of return and then, in essence, lower the amount that's going to show as funded?
Right.
If it's just a scheme anyways, why not double the rate of return and show a higher percent funded if we don't need to be fully funded?
Because even though
School of Accounting.
that model showed that we don't have to be fully funded in order to pay pension payments, the state of Illinois says something very different, which is you have to be 90% funded by 2040, and to the extent that you put in more money now, you don't have to put in as much money later. There's going to come a point in the 2030s or so, as we approach 2048, those payments are going to start to ramp up. And it's because the actuarial determined liability is going to have to be amortized over a shorter period of time as you get closer to 2040. And the state of Illinois has the ability now to withhold payments to villages and cities if they're not making their required contributions every year. So the answer to your question is, until the state law changes, we should be putting more money into the funds because we're going to have to do it eventually anyway.
So this is one of the most important things. When people talk about pension reform, I think in the public's mind, there's this misunderstanding of what pension reform is. The idea of the state not requiring 90% funding by 2040, that's pension reform. If there was a change to just the law for the requirement of percentage of funding, that is huge. And as Director Monchain said earlier, that either we can divert the monies that we're already collecting to other places, either employees or projects, or simply not have to collect as much from the taxpayers. Or whether it's something like pension consolidation. When we talk about this, Michael, how many?
653.
653, give or take, different pension funds that the state of Illinois has for police and fire. That's not, there's nothing punitive in that. This isn't taking anything away from the people that are in the pension system. What it is creating efficiencies and more opportunities for investment that lower the dependence on taxpayer, property taxes, whatever the revenue source is, paying into it. This isn't about, people freak out about pension reform because they think we're trying to take money away from people who have earned it. That's not it at all. But there is a way to provide the same level of benefits for less money. And that is something that the municipal conference has been working on, and I think, Trustee Vito, to answer your question, the answer is we just have to get to the state legislators and make them see the light about where there are some huge inefficiencies that can help get us out of the mess that we're in with the state, because so much of that problem is based on pensions.
Mike, why, okay, there's going to be more than one municipality that does not meet the 90% in 2040. I will guarantee you that.
Yes.
So what's your prediction as to what happens to those municipalities? Because they're just not going to be able to do it.
Right, there's going to be a lot of municipalities, depending on what happens with the economy between now and 2040, what'll typically happen, the best indicator of what'll happen in the future is what has happened in the past, which is the state of Illinois extends the amortization period by moving it out. They just recently did that in 2016 for the city of Chicago. So the city of Chicago's pension funds, which are different than the downstate pension funds, now have until 2055 to become 90% funded. And so as we get closer to 2040, and a lot of these communities are in this boat, payments are going to ramp up. They're going to be screaming that we can't afford this. I think the state's going to do the same thing. They're going to extend it to, it's basically the same effect as refinancing your mortgage.
And I don't want to get into a situation where we're overfunded.
Right. You don't want to be overfunded. The other, Trustee Vito, the other point to your question is that this idea that we talked about today has not caught on. It's, just recently been introduced to a few finance directors and others, of course. And most people still believe you have to be 90% or 100% funded. So until that happens, the bond rating agencies are still looking at our pension funds and seeing that we're not, near where they think we ought to be, and there is the potential that they could downgrade us because we're not as well funded as they believe we should be.
I see. So, but isn't the percentage of fund, so we're 60% funded, isn't that directly related to the amount of rate of return that we're projecting? I mean, if you could legitimately say we have 100% rate of return, wouldn't that number of 60% go up to 100? So if it doesn't matter because of the piggy bank thing, and you can be 40% funded, why are we reducing the rate of return and then putting more money into the fund? Because it's going to lower our number, and if it's just a pie in the sky number that doesn't matter anyways, why not just up the rate of return to 40?
It is going to lower the percentage, but I think there's way too much emphasis placed on what our funding percentage is anyway. What's really important is whether or not we're putting enough money into the fund to ensure that the pension payments can be made in the future.
All right, I'll talk to you later because everyone wants to eat.
When we have the discussion, when we have our bond rating reviews with the bond rating agencies, we try to make that point to them.
Okay, thanks.
So, prizes. I'm going to make an executive decision here and exclude the assistant village manager. So, I don't know who these people are. Who is MCK, who is the highest?
She wouldn't let me copy.
That's why I have a lid on my phone. Sweet.
Andrew, is that you?
Thank you very much.
Toblerone.
My goodness.
It's Andrew.
Yeah.
Andrew Jennings.
Yeah.
Sweets are
Just milk chocolate.
Because he didn't get to see the questions before. You didn't? Sherry.
Sherry.
Hey, really? Yeah.
That's all we got.
give out.
There's no executive.
So there is no executive session today. All we need now is a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion trustee Vito, second trustee Papantos, roll call.
Trustee Vogel?
Yes.
Trustee Brady?
Yes.
Trustee Krueger?
Yes.
Trustee Lang?
Yes.
Trustee Papantos?
Yes.
Trustee Vito?
Yes.
President Horker?
Yes, thank you all for the work you've done in sharing your morning. Meeting adjourned.
Well done, Michael.